a beloved mother and friend.
Sarah was the sweetest person on this earth.
She wanted to do anything for you to make you happy.
Murdered in her home.
Just the sheer brutality. Somebody was out of control.
It was so terrifying. It was so frightening.
Sends police on the hunt for a killer.
Possible suspects right away is her husband.
And they find out, uh-oh, there's someone else involved with this person.
You were just sitting there wondering, are they ever going to find who did this?
But the search for the truth
This is strange. There were so many twists and turns. What really happened?
uncovers a culprit.
Something's going on here. They were never even on the suspect radar.
That surprises everyone.
Wow, that was a twist none of us expected.
It was shocking.
No, this isn't right.
I never expected that someone like that could be evil.
Howard County, Maryland, an affluent community nestled between Baltimore and Washington, D.C.
Howard County itself is a very quiet, peaceful suburb.
Howard County is very much a bedroom community. People move here for the schools. That's what it's known for. There's very, very little crime.
But on Sunday, November 15th, 1998, at 7:44 p.m., a concerned resident makes a call to police.
I have a friend who I normally hear from every day, and I haven't heard from her all day, and there's a really funny message on my machine from last night. And I wondered if someone could drive by her house and check it out.
What's the lady's name?
Sarah Roris.
I did not hear from Sarah all day. That is not normal. Something's wrong.
Laura tells police that the 35-year-old single mother lives with her 1-year-old son, but the boy is with his father this weekend. Patrol officers head to the Roris home in the township of Elkridge to investigate.
The police were able to gain access to the house, and upon entering the house, they conducted a sweep, and in the back family room, they found the body of Sarah Rares. It appeared that she'd been stabbed to death.
Even hardened homicide investigators are taken aback when they see Sarah's mutilated body.
The thing that still sticks in my mind is just the sheer brutality. I can close my eyes and see it as vividly today as I did then. The ones most visible were wounds to Sarah's neck and throat, multiple deep cuts and slashes. She was basically just short of being decapitated. She had severe cuts to each wrist. Her hands were just short of being cut completely off. There was a series of stab wounds to her stomach. Tremendous amount of blood on the floor around her. Blood spattered up and down the walls. There was blood splattered all over the child's toys. It was complete and utter overkill. Somebody was out of control.
Could the vicious nature of the attack mean this was a crime of passion? Detectives hunt for clues to help piece together this gruesome event.
It was apparent that she had been dead for a period of time before we discovered her. The blood had pretty much dried. I was estimating she probably had been dead for about 24 hours. There had been forced entry to the house. Bloody boot prints leading from the body indicate that the suspect both entered and exited through the window. There appeared to be some degree of ransacking. VCR appeared to be missing. The phone was missing from the wall. A couple drawers in the kitchen had been rifled through, but at the same time, the victim's laptop, computer, purse, and items were relatively untouched on the kitchen table. An initial thought on our part was, could it all be staging in an attempt to throw us off, to make us think it was a robbery or burglary gone bad?
Looking for witnesses, police fan out to speak with Sarah's neighbors on her quiet suburban street.
As brutal and as violent as this attack was, nobody heard anything, not a sound.
Inside the house, the forensic team spends hours gathering evidence.
On the wall above Sarah's body, crime scene technicians were able to recover a couple bloody fingerprints. It indicated that the person was wearing gloves.
Investigators must now solve the mystery of why Sarah Raris would fall prey to such a brutal attack. Detectives start by speaking with Sarah's friend, Laura Billiter, who first called police. They have to reveal the heartbreaking news that her friend is dead.
I didn't want it to be true. I was in denial, and you just can't process information for a while. You're frozen. I kept trying to deny that it was Sarah. No one deserves to die like that.
Sarah Williamson was born on a Florida military base in 1963, the daughter of an Air Force sergeant. Growing up, she was gregarious with a knack for mathematics.
Sarah was not your typical introverted mathematician. She was very sociable.
To describe Sarah, she gave love freely. She wanted to do anything for you to make you happy.
After graduating college, Sarah moved to Maryland, where she took a job as a statistician at the National Security Agency.
Sarah and I met at work, and she was the best friend you could ever have. Sarah was the sweetest person on this earth. She had friends everywhere at work. She had built up a reputation for herself. She was well respected, and she always was going to school or improving herself in some way.
In 1991, while earning a master's degree, Sarah met Lorenzo Raris, and they began a relationship. The two married in 1994.
Sarah wanted the husband, the children, the house in the country, the white picket fence. She wanted that golden dream.
After 3 years of marriage, Sarah and Lorenzo had a son, Will.
She was a great mom. She doted on Will.
But the new baby put a strain on the marriage.
Her family was down in Alabama, so she was missing that support system. Lorenzo did very little to help her.
Over the next year, friends saw their relationship deteriorate.
Things really took a downturn. The marriage was breaking down. Sarah, during all that, was a complete mess.
In 1998, Sarah and Lorenzo separated. Eager for a fresh start, Sarah filed for divorce.
She was just becoming a strong woman again, proud of the fact that she was able to live on her own and take care of her child on her own. It was wonderful to see.
Now, 5 months later, Sarah's been found butchered in her own living room. The beloved mother's lifeless body left laying in a pool of blood.
She had become such a strong, independent woman, and I was so proud of her. I was devastated.
Laura gives detectives the phone message from her answering machine that prompted Laura to call police in the first place.
I couldn't understand any of it because it was so garbled. The only thing I knew, somebody was in trouble. I did a redial, and I figured out it was from Sarah.
In listening to the recording, you can hear sounds of a struggle, followed by a series of short, sharp screams. It was 30, 40 seconds, basically, of Sarah being murdered. I believe that she was probably in the process of maybe trying to call 911 when she inadvertently hit the preset speed dial for Laura.
The timestamp on the message is 8:46 p.m. on Saturday night, only 36 hours earlier.
The recording gave us a starting point that we know on this date and this time, Sarah Raris was attacked and murdered.
I could hear her last moments. I was shocked, I was horrified. And then I got angry, and I'm like, you gotta go pick up Lorenzo, he's involved in this.
Laura was aware Sarah was involved in a very bitter and heated custody dispute with her estranged husband. She had real fear that it was not going to end well. So I wanted to talk to the husband.
This is not going to be a random act of violence. This is going to be murder.
Coming up, a hunt for the truth.
Something's going on here. We had to look into the possibility of an affair.
Reveals buried secrets.
We opened the door and he threw up all over the parking lot. He knows something.
And a stunning turn in the case.
I was absolutely shocked. It's like out of a movie.
It was such an unexpected twist.
Hours after discovering the body of 35-year-old Sarah Raris, detectives investigating the murder have a lead. Sarah's friend Laura tells police she suspects Sarah's estranged husband, Lorenzo Raris, might have had something to do with her murder.
We found out that Sarah was involved in an extremely contentious custody divorce situation. Internal police records had indicated that the police had responded there at least once before for disturbance between Sarah and her estranged husband.
After Will was born, the marriage really started breaking down. Lorenzo was very jealous of his child because his child was taking away the attention that he had received from Sarah. Sarah told me that he was not happy with that.
Sarah turned to Lorenzo's mother, Amelia, who lived nearby, for help.
Sarah wanted Amelia involved. She was hoping that Amelia would be a calming influence on Lorenzo. And it would also allow, Sarah to spend a little bit more time with Lorenzo.
Instead of getting better, things got worse.
Sarah confided in me his mother was a little too involved doing all of the caregiving, and Lorenzo wanted nothing to do with the day-to-day task that it takes to raise a child. Sarah was very adamant that Lorenzo is his father. He needs to be very involved in taking care of their son.
One morning, I got a phone call. Sarah was hysterical. She and Lorenzo got into an argument. He tried to hit her while she was holding Will, so she had to turn with the baby in her arms, and he had kicked her. She was just distraught. And I come pick her up, and we head straight to the courtroom. We put a restraining order in, and Lorenzo is not allowed back into the house. Lorenzo was extremely mad. Sarah was scared for her life. She was deathly afraid that she was going to be murdered.
Lorenzo Raris is approached by the Howard County Police for questioning.
When Lorenzo was first notified that his wife had been murdered, he covered his face with his hands. He fell to his knees. And in the initial officer's minds, he pretended to be crying and weeping into his hands, and that when he stood up, there was no evidence at all that he had been crying. One of the first things I noticed in dealing with Lorenzo was his lack of reaction, his lack of emotion, his lack of caring was significant. I thought he was smug, I thought he was arrogant. I just sensed he wasn't all that upset by what had happened to Sarah.
Detectives start by asking the 33-year-old sales manager if he had any involvement in Sarah's murder.
He denied it, that he'd had anything to do with it. At the same time, I just felt that there was something off. It was just an instinct on my part, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
Lorenzo offers up his own theory as to who killed Sarah.
He alluded to the fact that Sarah may have been involved or been having an affair with a previous co-worker, but he said that if anything had happened, it would have probably been a result of this affair.
Lorenzo claims the last time he saw Sarah was on Friday morning when he picked up their son for the weekend.
The alibi that he provided for the Saturday night and weekend in question was that he was at home at the family house with the baby. His brother and his parents, who also lived in the house, were there.
Detectives collect evidence from Lorenzo to search against anything found at the crime scene.
We had a search warrant for his person, which allowed us to collect samples of DNA, hair, photographs, and fingerprints.
With nothing concrete to tie Lorenzo to the murder, detectives have to let him go.
Even though everything was pointing towards Lorenzo, he still has an alibi when he's saying he's at home and he's got all these family witnesses. If in fact he did it, we need to start punching holes in the family alibi.
Investigators head to the Raris family home, 30 minutes away in Parkville.
His car was seized, and other detectives then launched into the search of the Raris family home. We conducted interviews with all the family members, including Lorenzo's mother, Amelia. When asked where she was on that Saturday night, she said that she was working. She was a nurse's aide at a local nursing home, so she was at work during the time frame of the homicide.
Amelia tells detectives that another member of the Raris family was at home that night.
Lorenzo's brother, Mike, lived with the Raris family in Parkville. They all lived in the same house. Mike is the younger brother of Lorenzo, but as far as their personalities, there was a distinct difference between the two. He didn't have the same degree of arrogance or smugness about him that Lorenzo had. He appeared to be somewhat timid.
Mike tells police that Lorenzo was at home when he woke up to go work his night shift job.
It's the family saying he was there. A family alibi, in my opinion, has never been rock solid. It has to be investigated.
But a search of the Raris home fails to yield any new clues.
Nothing of evidentiary value came from the Raris house. Nothing of evidentiary value came from his truck. The only thing we walked away with is we had his initial denials and his initial alibi. From that point on, he lawyered up.
As detectives consider their next move, the public concern about the murder of Sarah Raris grows.
This murder sent shockwaves through the Howard County community. It caused major headlines.
There are a lot of Sarahs in this community, so to have a smart, competent, career-driven woman murdered in this way in her house, it was shocking.
With nothing tying Lorenzo to the murder, investigators turn their attention to his allegation that Sarah was having an affair. Could that have led to her death?
We had to look into the possibility of an affair. The former boss that Lorenzo claimed she was having an affair with had to be tracked down and interviewed. The relationship between the two of them, we had to look at it. We had to investigate.
Police investigating the savage murder of Sarah Raris are looking into her estranged husband's claim that Sarah had been having an affair with her former boss.
Lorenzo had implied that Sarah was having an affair with a former co-worker or supervisor, a gentleman by the name of Don Lewis. He had since retired from NSA and was living in Massachusetts.
Detectives travel to Cape Cod to interview Don Lewis. The 51-year-old tells detectives that he is not surprised by Lorenzo's claim of an affair.
Mr. Lewis told us that Lorenzo had emailed accusing him of having an affair with Sarah. He denied it. He said he was a father figure or mentor to Sarah. There was no romantic overtones, and there was no reason for him to kill her, nor did he want anything bad to happen to her.
Don tells detectives he had been shocked to hear news of Sarah's death, and he was at a friend's dinner party hundreds of miles away when it happened.
Mr. Lewis had an alibi for the Saturday night. He was in Massachusetts the night of the murder, and they had a solid alibi.
Detectives reach out to those close to Sarah to learn more about her relationship with her former boss.
Don Lewis was a friend of hers. They did have a mentor-mentee relationship, but that was all there was to Don Lewis.
It was more like a father-daughter type of relationship. There was never a romance.
The investigation revealed that the affair aspect of it appeared to be pure fabrication on the part of Lorenzo. There was just nothing there.
A week following her death, those closest to Sarah gather to honor her memory.
The church memorial was packed. There was so much love in that room. Everybody showed up. All of her coworkers and friends from work showed up. The police showed up. Lorenzo didn't show up, nor did any of the rest of the family.
I actually covered her memorial service. Her friends were not shy about casting aspersions on Lorenzo Raris, her husband. That's their suspect number one, their prime suspect.
After Sarah's funeral, investigators speak with the medical examiner about what was found during the autopsy.
The cause of death was no surprise. It was massive blood loss due to the lacerations to her throat. She bled out over 80% of her blood volume. Even the pathologist characterized it as complete overkill.
A forensics report reveals no useful fingerprints from the crime scene. But investigators still hold hope for tests on the bloody glove prints found on the wall behind the body.
The blood was sent out for DNA analysis. It takes a little bit of time to obtain.
While they await test results, detectives revisit their strongest lead, the phone message that captured the final moments of Sarah's life.
Other detectives are listening to the tape, and they thought that at some point in the struggle, they heard Sarah utter the name Mike.
Could Sarah be calling out the name of her killer?
Somebody says, oh, right there, it sounds like Mike. I hear Mike. Lorenzo's brother's name is Mike or Michael.
But what possible motive could Mike Raris have to kill his sister-in-law?
One of the theories that we were kicking around at this point was, could it have been a family member? Because initially all suspicion would have fallen on Lorenzo. And to keep Lorenzo out of it and to maintain the child custody, to have a family member do it, the most logical one would have been Mike. He had to be looked at as a potential suspect.
Detectives sit down with Lorenzo's little brother and play him the answering machine message.
The recording was played for him, and Mike was asked, do you hear the name Mike? And he said no, he did not. Mike denied being personally involved in the murder of Sarah. My overall impressions of Mike was, I don't think he had it in him to do something like this, but I had a feeling that there was something playing on him. Again, he was part of Lorenzo's alibi that he was at home at the time of the murder.
Mike sticks to the story he'd previously told police, that when he woke up Saturday evening to go to work, Lorenzo was at home.
Blood was drawn, hairs were pulled. We fingerprinted him, we photographed him. We drove him back to his job. I told him, I said, I think you know what happened. I think you know what is going on. And we opened the door, and he threw up all over the parking lot. And I said, whenever you want to come clean on this, you know who to call, and I gave him my card. My partner and I, we both felt he knows something.
Detectives investigating the murder of Sarah Raris suspect that her brother-in-law, Mike Raris, might know more about her murder than he is letting on.
My feeling was something's going on here. Maybe if he didn't do it, he definitely knows about it.
Mike's brother and Sarah's estranged husband, Lorenzo Raris, is still a suspect in Sarah's murder. But both men say they were at home together at the time she was killed.
If there was one avenue to break the Raris family alibi, I just thought the weak link was going to be Mike. The problem was the lawyer that was representing Lorenzo got involved, and from that point on, we were not allowed to speak with Mike without counsel being present. that threw up a huge wall.
A month following the murder, the police investigation is at a standstill. But there is one person that investigators think might be able to help.
Lorenzo had been married previously. His first wife, Becky, was still living locally. We thought she's somebody that we could enlist.
Detectives meet with Becky Rauris to ask for her assistance in the investigation.
Once she heard that Sarah had been murdered, Becky actually agreed to help us. She still had some degree of relationship with Lorenzo. They were cordial to each other. Becky agreed to allow us to record her phone calls with Lorenzo. We were hoping to obtain statements from Lorenzo that would incriminate him in the murder.
Becky reaches out to her ex-husband and tries to steer their conversation to Sarah's murder.
She was phenomenal. She conducted a number of controlled calls on our behalf with him. We were hopefully optimistic that we would get something, but he never said anything incriminating to her on those recordings.
Detectives have hit a dead end in their pursuit of Sarah's killer.
I remember cornering the police chief out of like a public event to ask him, hey, any updates on the case? And he obviously said no. There were no updates to give. They had nothing.
I prayed every day that this would be the day that something, would come forth.
Investigators get new hope when DNA analysis of blood from the glove prints at the crime scene comes back.
The blood came back as a mixture of Sarah's DNA and an unknown male. We were confident that we had the killer's DNA because it's mixed with Sarah's blood. If we found that person, then we could definitely put them at the scene with her actually bleeding.
Could this finally be what detectives need to tie Lorenzo to his wife's murder?
We submitted DNA samples from Lorenzo and his brother Mike for DNA comparison. Came back that neither one were a match. Obviously, that was a bit of a blow. I mean, it's very disappointing. Even though everything was pointing towards Lorenzo, it's not him.
In the beginning, it was pretty clear the police thought that her husband played a role in this. She had a very messy divorce going on. There were custody disputes, but the police didn't arrest him. And so there was a real air of mystery about it because the police couldn't figure it out either.
If Lorenzo was not responsible for the murder of Sarah, who could her killer be? And why was the beloved mother killed in such a violent manner? Investigators are back to square one.
Something has got to give on this. You go back through it again. Did I miss something? You have to look at everything. I did contact the FBI Behavioral Sciences Unit in Quantico, and they run it against all other cases in the country looking for similarities. Nothing of value came from that.
Detectives also seek help with deciphering the answering machine message from Laura that captured Sarah's attack.
We sent the recording to the FBI to see if they could clean it up and enhance it to try to determine if in fact it was a name. But it turned out it's not Mike. The whole thing with hearing the name Mike, I think, in hindsight, was just pure power of suggestion.
When you have a murder of this sort and no arrest, there was a concern and tension in the community as to what kind of person would do something like this.
We had been hammering away on this thing for almost 7, 8 months. At that point, we're kind of like dead in the water. We felt there was nothing else we could do to advance the case.
You were just sitting there wondering, are they ever going to find who did this? You started to lose hope.
Just as the case goes cold, an urgent call comes in from a neighboring jurisdiction.
My partner came running down the hall and says, "You need to come down and take this call. I have Baltimore County Homicide on the phone. You need to hear this. We got it. We got this case."
The 7-month hunt for the killer of Sarah Raris is at a standstill when detectives investigating the murder receive an unexpected phone call.
Picked up the phone, and it was Detective Phil Morrill from Baltimore County. He says, "Hey," he says, "I just got done running a wired conversation with an inmate in the Baltimore County Detention Center, talking about how he committed this murder of a woman." He described how he went through the window and how he attacked her, how he stabbed her in the belly. And he said, I damn near took her head off. And he says, "Do you guys have anything like it?" And I said, "Oh yeah, we do. The murder of Sarah Raris." And he said, "Well, you need to hear this tape."
Howard County investigators get a copy of the jailhouse recording of Ardale Tickles, who had been locked up for an armed robbery 3 months ago.
We sat down and we started listening to the tape of Ardale Tickles. Tickles is describing this homicide that he had committed.
Yeah, the one that I killed, walked up through the window. She's like, "No, don't kill me, please don't." And I started driving her in her belly, and blood was just gushing out. On her wrist, there was no blood. I took the knife, and I just took the head off.
Tickles is describing things that only the police and the suspect would know, all the injuries that had been inflicted upon Sarah. None of that had been released. None of that had been made public. I knew now we had it. I mean, I'm confident Ardale Tickles committed this murder.
Tickles keeps talking and has an even bigger revelation.
He's talking about how he came to be employed to do this.
I got paid, you know what I'm saying, to let me while I was working out. She told me to go hit this place. He just gave me the head to do it, and I went to go do it.
It's now a straight-up murder for hire. We had the actual physical killer of Sarah Raris. We needed the person who hired him and paid him to conduct the murder, a co-worker. We had some homework to do.
Who was this mysterious co-worker? What was her relation to Sarah? And why would she want Sarah killed? Investigators start with Ardale Tickles.
He's 19 years old. He's a kid at this point. He was incarcerated awaiting trial. He robbed the McDonald's and he shot the manager during the course of the robbery. When we started digging into him, we couldn't find any kind of criminal record with him prior to this.
Detectives checked Tickles' employment history, looking for any intersection with Sarah's life or those that knew her.
We went back like a year. He was employed in the laundry room at a local nursing home in Baltimore. He did the laundry for this facility.
The entire investigation turns when detectives realize who also worked at the same nursing home.
Lorenzo's mother, Amelia, they were co-workers. That was kind of mind-blowing, you know. She was never even on the suspect radar. Him and Amelia working at the same nursing home, it was the one piece to the puzzle that you needed to put in, and the rest of them just kind of fell into place after that.
Could it really be true that this 63-year-old grandmother hired someone to kill her daughter-in-law? And if it is true, who else knew about it?
We still weren't convinced that Lorenzo was completely blameless in this. So there was still a lot of investigative work to do. The Raris house in Parkville was put under surveillance while we investigated the relationship between Tickles and Amelia. We matched up work schedules. So we were able to establish, yes, they worked together. Yes, they worked the same hours. We were able to locate a few co-workers who remember seeing Amelia talking to this guy. We were able to show that relationship did in fact exist.
But even with a known relationship, police had no evidence Amelia plotted to murder Sarah. To get to the truth, investigators turned to the man they believe killed Sarah.
Tickles was brought in to try to elicit his cooperation. What he gives up, we can use.
Detectives play Tickles the jailhouse recording.
I had the tape recording set to a point where he admits to stabbing her. He heard his voice talk about the murder. As you can see, we don't need your concession. No, we got it.
Can you please enlighten me on what I'm facing and what I'm dealing with in this case?
You're going to be charged with 1 count of first-degree murder. But we need to get some details worked out. The person we want is this woman that hired you. I had a picture of Amelia. I said, is this the woman? And he says, yeah, that's her. We got her. I mean, it was huge. In some respects, it validated what we thought all along, that everything originated in the Rares household, in the Rares family. Never in 100 years would we have thought that she's the one that was calling the shots. What did she say to you?
She was tormented. She couldn't go on with life until this lady was dead. She was like, do me a favor and kill this lady, basically.
So she used the word kill?
Kill, take him off the earth, yeah. And she said, I'll pay you. She said, I'll give you money.
If you hire somebody to commit a murder and that person carries it out, then you're susceptible to the same charges and the same penalties as the person who did the actual killing. So now we're looking at first-degree murder charges for Amelia. After it was over with, did you call this woman that night?
No, I met her at work, like that week.
Okay, is that when she paid you?
Yeah, she had a bundle with like $3,000.
Despite Tickle's revelations, investigators know it will be hard to bring charges against Amelia on the word of a jailed offender.
We had enough. We could have easily arrested Tickles and called it case closed. We needed something that really implicated Amelia in the conspiracy. What we wanted him to do to nail down the first-degree murder charge was get on the phone and call Amelia. We wanted to run a controlled call with him, and he refused. When that didn't happen, we had some work to do.
Investigators now suspect Sarah Raris was murdered in a hit organized by her mother-in-law, Amelia Raris. But the hitman, Ardale Tickles, refuses to take part in a wiretap to implicate her.
I would have loved to have got this controlled phone call to Amelia to further establish Amelia's involvement in the planning of the murder, but we still felt we were on the right track. A big item of evidence in this case obviously would be follow the money. We pulled Amelia's financial records and found out, sure enough, Amelia wrote a check out in the amount that Tickles says he got paid, and she wrote it out to cash. That was key. That's the money trail.
Amelia Raris is arrested and interviewed by detectives.
She acknowledged her relationship with Tickles, and she also acknowledged that she hired him, but she alleged that she did not hire him to kill her. He did that on his own, she said. I just wanted to scare her.
There was no intention to kill. I didn't know that it's like that. In fact, I thought he's not going to kill her. He is just going to stone the house. You know, you throw the stone there.
$3,000 to stone the house?
Yes, to stone the house. And make her feel sorry as revenge for me.
Amelia told us she wanted Sarah scared because she felt that Sarah, throughout their relationship, had disrespected her, did not acknowledge her as a woman with more maternal experience.
Because of the child?
Because of the child. I am not the one come to help. I think she did not like my style. The mother in my culture is revered and respected. I want to be treated with respect. I'm her mother. My marriage, she disrespected me. That is a slap on my face, and it is even more than death to me.
I understand. You were insulted.
Oh my God. Million words more than that. Showing disrespect to a mother is death.
Is it enough, though, to have someone killed?
Yes, because it will be.
I think she was trying to portray herself as this poor little old lady who was as much a victim as anything. We weren't buying any of it. I mean, it's pure evil. There's no other way to describe, what happened here.
Then, detectives ask Amelia the question they've been trying to answer since day one.
Is Lorenzo involved?
No,
Does he know to this day what happened?
no. I do not want to tell my son. Because if I tell him, he will have problems. He loves the woman very much.
He's still in love with her?
Yeah. My
Does
wife-
Michael know anything about this?
No. We will not tell him.
Despite Amelia's claim that she had no intention for Sarah to be killed, police proceed with charges against her.
We were able to establish that she hired him and paid him. That gave us more than enough to further solidify the case we had against her already.
The case against Ardale Tickles is strengthened when tests match his DNA to blood evidence found at the crime scene.
Both Ardale Tickles and Amelia Reyes were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and in Amelia's case, she was charged with the crime of solicitation.
When we first heard that it was Amelia, the feeling was, no, this isn't right.
When I found out about her, I'm like, where the heck did Amelia come from?
I was absolutely shocked that the mother-in-law orchestrated the entire thing, and it was a hitman who did it. Was, wow, that was a twist none of us expected. Like, there's no way. It's like out of a movie.
In January of 2000, both Ardale Tickles and Amelia Reyes faced trial for the murder of Sarah Reyes.
There was no trial for Ardale Tickles.
He was going to go to trial, and Ardale Tickles unexpectedly decides to plead guilty. He's completely remorseful. He says, I shouldn't have done it. And then he got life in prison from the judge.
Amelia Reyes enters a plea of not guilty.
She maintained her innocence that she had just paid this guy $3,000 to go throw stones at the house.
I testified at the trial. I was there to let the jury know who Sarah was. I was afraid they would see this sweet, meek little old lady and not believe that someone like that could be evil and could organize this murder.
Ardale Tickles refuses to testify, but prosecutors present the recording of his police interview describing the plot and the crime, as well as the telephone message that captured Sarah's last moments of life.
It was so terrifying. It was so frightening. It was so unspeakably brutal. It was chilling.
After a 7-day trial, Amelia Reyes is found guilty of all charges. She is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I was relieved when the guilty verdict was read, and I am glad that they saw through that demeanor that she put on.
For those closest to Sarah, there will always be a void left behind.
She gave joy, she received joy. I really do miss her. I need to hear her laugh.
We lost a really good person that day. We lost a light. And I just hope that, she's happy in God's arms and that she's looking out for Will. I miss her so much.
A sweet and beloved senior.
Margaret liked being out. She liked being around people.
She was very friendly, very outgoing.
Is viciously murdered in her own home.
Oh my Lord, it's her. And I pretty much lost it.
I actually thought I was going to get sick.
To be snuffed out in such a way is just horrific.
Police uncover a trail of suspects.
How would he know the information unless he was in the crime scene?
Having people know how she was found and even what she was wearing is very suspicious.
It just wasn't adding up. He was not being honest and something else was going on.
Before a disturbing discovery.
He was just photographing her in her own home.
Points to a deranged killer nobody saw coming.
I don't think anyone in law enforcement could have had any inkling of the outcome of this case.
This is sick. This is not a normal murder.
This wasn't a horror movie. This was actually happening.
Wadsworth, Ohio, a haven for families just outside Akron.
Wadsworth, a very quiet town. It's very community-oriented.
It's a great family community. It's very common for people not even to lock their doors because there's never a lot of crime that occurs right around in there.
On a Monday morning, April 9th, 2018, the peace is interrupted when police receive a call from a worried citizen.
Watcher Police.
Yes, this is Howard Leisure. My aunt lives on Portage Street. A friend of ours stopped over there yesterday to check on her, and she was nowhere to be found.
Okay.
He says papers were on the porch for the last 3 days.
What's her name?
Margaret Douglas.
Initially, the police department was contacted about Margaret being missing from her home.
We don't know where she's at. She's 98 years old.
Did she live there by herself?
She lives there by herself, yes. And she never locks her house.
So our initial response was to look for Margaret to see if she had fallen inside her home and needed help. Patrol officers walked through it, yelling for her to see if she would answer.
We continued to canvass the neighborhood, and we did not locate her.
If her close friends, she's not with them, something's wrong.
We contacted area hospitals and looked in any possible place that she could be.
Margaret was just basically missing.
That evening, Howard and his wife, Cindy, head to Margaret's home to help police with the search.
They asked if we could come down and meet them at the house.
Howard and Cindy started to look for some items common for Margaret to have taken with her when she left. There were specific shoes that she would wear. They were looking for a little red wallet that she carried her money and her credit cards in when she left the home.
So Howard went to look in that front closet.
The clothes had dropped or slipped down that was piled in the top of the closet.
He said, "Oh, I found her shoe." He tried to pull the shoe out.
And I touched it, and it felt cold and clammy.
The shoe was still attached to Margaret, who was in the closet.
And I thought, oh my Lord, it's her. And I pretty much lost it. Something I'll never forget, I'm sorry. But to find her like that.
It was a terrible shock, especially for her nephew, Howard, and I just remember the look on his face.
I actually thought I was going to get sick. I think we were just so appalled and shocked that someone would kill her.
What motive could there be to kill a 98-year-old woman? What could she have done to anybody that would have resulted in that?
Margaret's home is declared a crime scene, and homicide detectives arrive.
Margaret was positioned with her head down in the corner and her backside kind of up in the air. Her underpants were torn inside the closet there. Her nightgown was all unsnapped, and her bra was pulled up. I immediately thought that there was a sexual element to the crime. There was a lot of trauma to Margaret's neck region. Somebody was able to strangle her, and my assumption was manually due to the lack of any ligature marks.
Looking at the condition of Margaret's body, rigor had came and gone. You could look at the different lividity and the pulling of the blood inside the body to see it appeared she had been there for a few days.
As the forensics team gathers DNA and fingerprints, detectives search the house for further evidence.
Her wallet was not located, so that gave us an indication that maybe this was a burglary and they had made off with just the wallet. Margaret didn't always lock her doors, so we weren't surprised when we didn't find forced entry into her home.
Investigators find their first clue outside the home.
I observed a plastic food service glove on the back side of the house, and collected the glove just in case that it was involved.
There was not a lot of physical evidence at the crime scene. Besides the glove, the missing wallet was something, but nothing that would direct us in a certain way.
Who would attack and kill a 98-year-old woman in her own home? As they set out for answers, detectives turned to Howard and Cindy to learn more about Margaret.
The best thing to do is to get to know your victim as best you can.
Born in Akron, Ohio in 1919, Margaret was known as a woman of strong character with a fiercely independent streak.
She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to go after what she wanted to get.
Margaret often told us about her days working at the O'Neills in downtown Akron. She liked being out, she liked being around people.
She was very friendly, very outgoing.
Margaret had very strong opinions, and she was certainly not afraid to tell you what her opinion was.
She was a pretty independent woman, let's put it that way.
After World War II, Margaret married the love of her life, Army veteran Donald Douglas.
If I saw Margaret, I saw Donald, her husband. They were made for each other. They just complemented each other.
The couple moved into the house that Margaret would live in for the rest of her life.
I think Margaret might have lived in that neighborhood close to 70 years.
It was Margaret and Donald's choice not to have any children, and they seemed extremely happy together.
They liked to travel together. They went to ball games. They enjoyed going to the Indians game.
When Donald passed away in the year 2000, Margaret chose to remain in her house, surrounded by friends and caring neighbors.
Margaret was a pretty good friend with the neighbors, David and his wife.
There was another neighbor across the street. Her name was Jan. They just sort of kept an eye on Margaret.
She knew all the kids in the neighborhood, but as she got older, she's got more restricted to the house. And that's when me and my wife stepped in at that point and started taking her shopping and doing things for her as needed.
Margaret loved the fact that she was 98 years old, and she wanted to be 100. She truly loved life.
For someone to have lived such a wonderful, vibrant life, only to be snuffed out in such a way is just horrific. I have a grandmother that's similar in age. It's just very hit close to home.
The investigators were under a tremendous amount of pressure. Every one of them took it very personally, and I think every one of them wanted to find justice very quickly for the family.
At the onset, we had no clue. There was no direction.
Maybe it's financial. Maybe it was a relationship issue. Maybe it was an argument that went too far and something happened that they didn't expect. But at that stage in the investigation, you just don't know.
We need to start somewhere, so we start closest to her.
So that would include looking at Howard and Cindy.
We definitely leave everyone on the list until we can exclusively rule them out and have that be a certainty and not just a feeling.
Coming up, is Margaret's killer hiding in plain sight?
He knew details of where Margaret was found and in what state she was found.
He's come back to the scene of a crime.
Detectives unearth dark secrets.
We found a journal about a desire to kill people.
He was videotaping her while she slept, stalking his victim like an animal stalks its prey.
Leading to a killer no one saw coming.
This is somebody that's ultimately going to be a serial killer if he's not caught.
Police are investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas, whose body was discovered stuffed in a closet in her own home.
I just can't imagine a 98-year-old woman being that terrified and not knowing what to do. It's definitely one of the most traumatic things I've ever had to experience in my years with the Wadsworth Police Department.
Detectives begin by interviewing those closest to Margaret, her nephew Howard and his wife Cindy.
We fingerprint and get DNA from Cindy and Howard to show whether their fingerprints or DNA were on something that it should not have been on. We did subpoenas for phone records and also location data, GPS data, so we could tell their whereabouts during the time in question. Cindy and Howard lived approximately 30 or 40-minute drive away, but they would come into town a couple times a month to do her grocery shopping.
She always paid with cash. We swung down, went to the bank, she threw $200 out to go shopping with.
Police ask Howard about Margaret's finances. Was there anyone who stood to gain from her death?
Margaret was really in charge of her own finances. We did look into those accounts and check for activity. We were never able to locate any activity that was out of the normal.
Does she have a power of attorney or a will or anything then?
No. We've been telling her she needs a will, she needs this. She would never take the time to do it.
There was nobody that we could find that would have any financial gain from her death.
Could Howard or Cindy think of anyone who might wish to harm Margaret?
Any problems with her? Did she want to argue with people or anything like that? Nothing?
No, sweet old lady.
And nobody else, she didn't, have any problems with anybody that...
Not that I know. She was... Margaret often knew. That's why it's so just horrible.
Come and check on her a couple of times a week just to see if she was okay and if she needed anything.
David has the most contact with her.
Yeah, he'd go every week, take her trash out, and then he'd take the can back in the next day. So.
After interviewing Howard and Cindy, detectives try to contact David, but he's not answering their calls.
There was some concern not being able to reach David, and that was troubling. We didn't have any other suspects. It made us wonder what was going on.
As detectives try to track David down, patrol officers continue to canvass Margaret's neighbors for information.
During the canvass, we did learn that there had been some vehicles in the neighborhood that had been rifled through, and small items were taken out, like change and things like that.
Is this somebody that was up by Margaret's house and found a crime of opportunity because it's somebody that they can maybe figure out lives alone?
As the canvass continues, officers notice someone watching the activity around Margaret's house.
I noticed a man outside smoking a cigarette, so I went out to make contact with him. This person ended up being David Klinkenbeard. He said that he used to live next door to Margaret. He kind of wanted to know what was going on.
He said he was essentially canvassing the neighborhood looking for anything that was suspicious.
David did strike me as odd at first. It was concerning to me that he was standing out there trying to determine what exactly we had found.
As David continues to talk, police grow increasingly suspicious.
He was kind of making comments about information that seemed strange that he would know about.
He knew details of where Margaret was found and in what state she was found. Having people know how she was found and even what she was wearing is very suspicious. You don't know where someone has gotten their information. Were they there? Were they involved in the murder?
With a growing list of questions about David, officers approach Margaret's neighbors for answers.
One of the neighbors had mentioned how they had seen David driving through the neighborhood, but didn't stop, just kind of drove through. So they thought that was kind of strange. Maybe he's come back to the scene of a crime, whether he's driving back by because he knows what he did and he's having remorse, or maybe trying to get back inside there to get her body out of there and get rid of it, or to look to see if he left anything behind.
David told some of the neighbors that his fingerprints would be all over the house and he would have to get his fingerprints taken, which is not something that people usually say or think.
The next day, David's appearance in local news coverage of the murder raises further alarm bells.
I turned on the news and there he is on TV, talking to the reporters, putting himself out there.
Was this a guilty man's ploy to hide in plain sight?
That seemed out of sorts to us. Generally, when people are grieving a loss, their instinct is not to cooperate with the media, but David seemed very willing to speak with them.
All of these things added together are possible indicators of someone who is purposely trying to insert themselves in the investigation because they're involved in this investigation.
Could David have possibly been involved in Margaret's murder?
At that point, we had some questions about his actions and his knowledge of how Margaret was found.
He definitely became a main point of interest.
On April 11th, 2 days after finding Margaret's body in her own home, police bring her former neighbor, David Klinkenbeard, in for questioning.
David told us that he last saw Margaret when he was helping her with her trash can on Wednesday.
You didn't come by on Thursday or Friday, not till Sunday?
No, not till Sunday.
On Sunday, he had gone over to the house and he didn't locate her. He had some concerns that maybe she was upstairs in a state of undress and he didn't want to go up there himself. So he contacted Jan across the street.
And that's when you had Jan come over in case she was upstairs and not decent.
Yeah, Jan went up there, she wasn't up there, and then we looked in the closet up there.
Okay, your friend's missing. That'd be the last thing in your mind, whether they're dressed or not. You would go and look for them throughout the entire house, not go get somebody else.
As the interview continues, David's answers only raise further suspicion.
She likes to look nice, and she was a pretty woman.
Yeah.
When she was younger, she was a redhead.
Wow.
Yeah. And she was really, back then, she was really kind of like, not thin then, but, you know, I was surprised because she looked back then.
Some of the comments that he made about Margaret, in particular her physical appearance when she was younger, she had just been murdered, and here he is describing her figure and her body type in an interview.
The detective asked David about the calls he made when he couldn't find Margaret.
Oh, I want to use my cell phone to call Howard because I got this number on my phone.
Do you have your phone with you?
Yeah.
Would you mind if I had my computer guy just go through and write down the dates of your calls?
I have.
He said he must have left it at home and didn't have it on his person.
It seems strange because, you know, in this day and age, nobody goes anywhere without their cell phone. Their cell phone is always on them.
Investigators must now subpoena David's cell phone records. At the same time, they receive a forensics report from the crime scene.
DNA belonging to Margaret was found on the glove that was discovered outside of Margaret's house.
We believe that the suspect's DNA was on the inside of the glove.
Would you mind if I was able to get a sample of your DNA? We know you're supposed to be in the house. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Detectives send David's DNA to compare against that found inside the glove. While they wait for the results, they check David's cell phone data to verify his alibi.
We were able to go through his day-to-day life and see that he likely was not involved, but there was no concrete evidence that we were able to bring to light.
Unlike the phone records, the DNA findings are conclusive. David is not Margaret's killer.
David ended up being, in the end of all this thing, just a friend of hers that was not involved at all.
Sometimes he would say things that didn't really have an explanation. It just took the time and the effort to understand his involvement, and there was reasonable explanation for all of the things that we had concerns about. He just really cared about Margaret and really had concern that he would have an answer as to what happened.
We had to look at David as probably our #1 interest because obviously his strange comments in the beginning about his DNA and fingerprints, plus he's the one that saw her on a regular basis.
Up until that point where you reach a crossroads, you really do have to look at every tiny detail, every possibility.
Detectives turn their attention to the autopsy report, which paints a terrifying picture of Margaret's last moments.
The medical examiner's report on Margaret showed what kind of force was used to kill her in the end. She had contusions to her head, to her face. She had a fracture to her orbital socket. She had a fracture to her C7 vertebrae in her neck that showed there was a compression there, which broke her neck.
Margaret was not a frail woman. Not just anyone would be able to manually strangle her.
While the autopsy finds no direct evidence of sexual assault, officers continue to suspect otherwise.
Why would her underwear be ripped off of her? They weren't like pulled off, they were torn.
There were other bodily fluids that were mixed in with the swabs from Margaret's body.
The fact that someone took Margaret in such a horrific manner was a very difficult thing to handle.
as homicide detectives regroup to search for new leads. Patrol officers alert them to an unusual crime reported in the early morning hours of April 8th, the day before Margaret's body is discovered.
There was a report of a carjacking very near the scene of Margaret Douglas's home. In a community like Wadsworth, we don't have carjackings. That's not a normal call for us.
They happened in such time close to one another that we had to wonder if they were related.
The carjacking victim is a local man named Paul Shalott.
Paul had reported he was driving along and he happened to notice a 19, 20-year-old man limping, like having trouble walking up the street.
Paul had reported to us that he was just being a good Samaritan and picking somebody up that he thought to be injured.
So as he went out to help him, he said the gentleman just slid into the driver's seat and then locked the doors, wouldn't let him in, and took off with his car.
Officers grow suspicious when they quickly locate Paul's car near the site of the carjacking.
The car was found very quickly, and it was found right there in the same area it was taken.
Literally, like, not even a block away from where he had picked this gentleman up, supposedly, and lost his car.
This happened at a building that had cameras on the outside, so we wanted to kind of investigate Paul's story because it just didn't seem quite right. You could see on the video that Paul had been with what appeared to be a young man. The young man was not limping. He did not seem to be injured in any way.
Paul's initial report did not match anything that video said. It just wasn't adding up. He was not being honest and something else was going on.
Why had Paul lied to police? And who was the young man seen in security footage? Had one of them gone on to do something unthinkable?
We had the carjacking, and then we had Mark's disappearance. It just started making me think a little bit, could this be the guy that could be involved?
Police investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas have a potential new lead after learning of an alleged carjacking in her quiet neighborhood.
Somebody that's willing to perpetrate a crime such as a carjacking makes you really wonder, is this related to a murder that's just happened a couple blocks away?
But when security video proves the victim, Paul Shalott, has lied to police, detectives demand answers.
When I interviewed Paul to get the whole story, he was very nervous, and then he finally started telling us the truth about how he came to be in that area and what really happened. He was on an app trying to meet somebody, and he did come across somebody. He said he worked for a church, and he didn't want them to find out that he's using a site to try to meet up with young men. He didn't want to admit it right away, but they started getting involved sexually in the car. The male subject he picked up, I guess, started getting upset that things weren't going his way.
The young man that he met up with just kind of snapped and took the car, not what Paul had expected when he met this person online.
With Paul finally being honest, detectives change course and ask if he knows anything about the murder of Margaret Douglas.
He was aware of what had happened and that she was a victim of a homicide. But Paul did not know Margaret at all.
He had no ties to her, and real no ties even in that neighborhood. He was just there basically to meet up with somebody that night. Then I started thinking, well, now we need to know who was driving that car, who carjacked him.
Paul was asked for the account information for the app that he used to meet this person on.
He said he couldn't remember the email he used or the password he used to get in there.
Paul was embarrassed about what he had let happen and the fact that he was involved with a young man. He had deleted everything from his phone that was relative to that. We weren't able to recover any of that information.
So we had no way of proving or figuring out who it was that he may have met up with that night.
After hitting another dead lead, frustrated investigators know that public fear is only growing.
There was definitely some fear. There were people that would normally stroll down the street, walk their dogs, let their kids play outside unsupervised, and things like that weren't happening after Margaret's discovery.
And the emotions for everybody were really high and heightened. They're all locking their doors now, and they're really watching for everything. So it was definitely a shock to all of them.
With the community on edge, Margaret's family continues to struggle with their loss.
The hardest part going through all this is the time-consuming and the worrying and waiting for the outcome, and you're not sure what's going to happen.
That was hard. You know, none of us are patient, and we all want to know what happened here, why someone would do this.
The reason you're doing what you're doing is for the victim. You want somebody to be held responsible for what they've done.
Believing that the carjacker may be a serial criminal, police take a closer look at the petty crimes reported around Margaret's neighborhood.
The crimes all took place in just a few block area.
Is there somebody in this neighborhood that's committing a whole bunch of crimes for some reason, because we weren't seeing those crimes spreading out throughout the city like we typically would?
You have to wonder if the person who's committing these petty crimes has escalated to commit something more horrific.
On the night of April 13th, 4 days after the discovery of Margaret's body, police received several calls about 2 young men.
We had received a lot of different calls where people had seen 2 male subjects running around, creating mischief, doing things at the park, doing things at the church, and in cars.
A couple of young males were taking some type of device that had wheels on the bottom and hanging out in one of the parking lots.
That same night, police respond to a call that changes everything.
It was reported to us that there had been a break-in to a trailer that was at a construction site.
When officers investigate, they get a huge break.
Someone had left their cell phone behind at the trailer.
Does the phone belong to the person responsible for the neighborhood crime spree, including Margaret's murder? Investigators used forensic software to unlock the phone.
The phone came back to a subject that we had been known in our area for different car break-ins and little thefts from cars that happened in our city, and especially over in that area.
He was identified by one of our officers as Zach Franz. Zach was known to us, and he did have a troubled past. He had been in some more serious trouble, and we were all familiar with him. At this point, we thought that we really needed to bring Zach in and talk to him about what he had been doing that night. Zach was found sleeping in his car at the high school in the parking lot.
As officers bring Zach into the station for an interview, something immediately catches their attention.
Zach had some scratches on his legs, which made me wonder where those came from.
Are they defensive wounds from somebody fighting back against you and scratching you that way? Could they be from something simple, explainable, or evidence into what we were looking into with regards to Margaret Douglas?
Police investigating the murder of Margaret Douglas have connected local teen Zach Thronson to a spate of crimes near her home.
With the carjacking, we know there was supposed to be a young male. Now we have Zach running around, committing these little crimes, all within the same area around the same time frame.
His phone was left behind at the trailer, so we knew for sure that he was involved in the crimes that were all seemingly tied together.
Detectives cut to the chase and ask Zach if he killed Margaret Douglas.
Zach, he owned up for the little things he did, but he denied any knowledge of it or being involved at all.
Detectives steer the interview to the identity of the teen seen with Zach in security footage.
He said that he was out with his friend Gavin Ramsey, and that everything that had happened was all Gavin's idea. Gavin had been the one that was trying to break into the trailer, and that he was just standing by and watching it happen, just a presence during the time that Gavin was committing all the other petty crimes. Zach was definitely distancing himself, so there was some concern that he wasn't being honest about everything that they had done.
For the moment, police decide not to charge Zach until they interview his friend, Gavin Ramsey.
Gavin had been in trouble before, and his mom had dealt with that. She was going to hold him accountable for the things he had done. We talked about a trailer, and I just let him know that we knew he was there because Zach had told us that he was there. property type crimes and less serious crimes is what we talked about at first.
That's just to see, is he going to own up to that? And then we'd continue from there into something more serious.
You guys didn't take anything? Did you rummage through glove boxes or anything?
Maybe like 50 times, but other than that, seriously nothing.
He admitted to all of them. He would rifle through cars and take things that weren't of a lot of value, just to take things.
Gavin told us during the interview, he does it for a rush, so it wasn't about money or anything.
I think the reason that he was so willing to admit to these lesser offenses is to kind of distance himself and clear his name from anything else I might want to talk to him about.
Now, detectives turn their questions to more serious crimes.
We had a carjacking.
Oh my God.
And the suspect is a young white male with a nice complexion and blue eyes. Is that you?
Gavin's demeanor changed substantially when I started to ask him about the carjacking.
Doesn't upset me so much. Is there something else you need to tell us?
You've already gotten yourself in trouble, so.
I know, and I don't need I don't know what to say.
Before answering further questions, Gavin asks to speak with a detective alone.
I don't think you two would actually be for a second. What's that? You two actually. So I can talk to her. Yeah.
Okay with you?
Sure.
So when his mom stepped out,
the carjacking, it was me, I'm gonna be honest about it, but the way that he explained it, that guy, that's not right.
he openly admitted that he was the one who did the carjacking. But he didn't really want to talk about the sexual part of what happened in there.
You guys didn't talk about what kind of sex you were gonna have, or?
No, I don't know, it's not something I'm interested in, just the act of him getting the payback, I guess, I don't know, that's, like, it's karma, really. Like, if you're gonna do that, then I'm gonna rob you.
Gavin denies that he was truly interested in meeting up with Paul for any reason other than to catfish him or to teach him a lesson.
This is a kid that's admitting to going around breaking into cars, and it's not for theft, it's for a rush, so we know he's after the adrenaline. What else could he have possibly done?
With Gavin admitting to the carjacking, the interview turns to questions about Margaret Douglas.
I specifically asked him if he had murdered Margaret, and he denied it.
There was no reason that we would find your DNA inside her house because we swabbed the hell out of that house.
You shouldn't.
I mean, if you've never been in there, then obviously we wouldn't. But, I mean, you name it. We swabbed it, we took it. I'm sure you know we were there all night.
Yeah.
He was hiding something. There was more to be said. I didn't feel that this avenue had been exhausted with him. This was something that we probably needed to revisit, maybe from another direction.
For now, detectives allow Gavin to leave with his mother.
At this point, we have nothing other than the petty crimes, which are handled through juvenile court, so we wouldn't actually take him into custody to hold him.
But they have one request for Gavin's mother.
I let her know that we had concerns and that I would like to look at his phone. I was expecting to find information about how maybe Gavin was victimized.
Instead, what officers find on Gavin's phone changes everything.
Officer Cooper discovered Google-type searches, murder in Wadsworth, Margaret Douglas investigation, Wadsworth PD reports on homicide investigation.
Then, detectives find something they never would have imagined.
There were actually photos and videos of Margaret Douglas.
Timestamps show that the images were recorded in the early morning hours of Friday, April 6th.
She obviously didn't know he was there, and he was just photographing her from a vantage point in her own home. There was clearly a point in time where she realized that someone was in her home and was startled.
Nothing can prepare investigators for what they see next.
I was absolutely shocked that a child could imagine doing this to another human being. This wasn't a horror movie. This was actually happening.
Detectives investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas have found disturbing evidence on a phone belonging to 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey.
The first thought in my mind was, he knows we're going to discover this. And I could just imagine him fleeing.
Police moved quickly to take Gavin into custody.
Once we picked him up, I briefly told his mom that we had discovered evidence on his phone and that we were going to take him back to the police department. It was definitely not the easiest interview that I had ever done.
I came up onto the porch, and I didn't even know what I was going to do. I don't know, I probably going into the house. It's like the biggest adrenaline rush I could get. So then I tried the doorknob, and that just happened to be unlocked.
He was videotaping her while she slept, stalking his victim like an animal stalks its prey.
So how long do you think you were in the house before you woke her up?
I don't know, probably like 10, 15 minutes.
You could see in some of the photos the obvious horror on her face as to what was happening.
And then from the time you woke her up to the time you ended up on top of her, how long did that whole part take?
Oh, it's probably like 5 minutes.
He had used both hands to squeeze her neck and push her neck back against the floor, strangling her. He said that once he realized the gravity of what he was doing, it was too late, that she was already gone.
For officers, the most disturbing questions involve what Gavin did after killing Margaret.
When I saw him, it was just like, this is sick. This is not a normal murder.
The sexual nature of his actions was kind of a topic that he was not willing to talk about.
He degraded her by using her for sexual things and videotaping and taking pictures. He'd actually been in there with her for a while.
And then I checked my phone, and it said it was like 4 something, and I knew my mom had to get up at 5 for work.
So he takes the body, finds the closet, because he has to get home. He throws in there to hide her because I don't want anybody to find her. I don't want anybody to know it's me.
But was Margaret simply a random victim of Gavin's need for a rush? Or had he known her better than he'd initially let on?
Gavin lived very close to Margaret Douglas, right around the corner from her house.
Gavin had actually been to her house before, asking her about maybe cutting her grass, raking leaves, or even, shoveling snow. He was out looking for little odd jobs around the neighborhood.
The thought in the back of my mind was that Gavin had observed Margaret regularly and actually thought about the things that he would like to do and that she would make a good victim.
Police arrest Gavin Ramsey for the murder of Margaret Douglas and get a search warrant for his bedroom.
We found gloves matching the same style and type of glove that was found at the scene.
In one of his drawers, I discovered Margaret's red wallet.
Detectives then make an even more disturbing find.
We also found a journal that had some writings about fantasies about murder. He had written almost like a book report on different serial killers. After reading those, there was no doubt in my mind that Gavin would kill again if he had the opportunity. This is something that he enjoys, that he finds pleasure in.
This is somebody that's ultimately going to be a serial killer if he's not caught.
Because of the heinous nature of the crime, the juvenile penal system is not equipped to deal with an individual such as Gavin Ramsey.
Gavin was ultimately charged as an adult with aggravated murder, 2 other counts of murder, burglary, and abuse of a corpse.
We requested that Mr. Ramsey receive the harshest penalty that the law would allow.
Found guilty on all charges, Gavin is sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Margaret Douglas.
When I watched Gavin Ramsey at the sentencing, I still felt in my mind that he doesn't understand the gravity of what he's done. There's still no remorse there.
You would like to think that the world is full of people like you and I, and don't want to think that of such a young person able to act out something that you would only see in a horror movie.
I was shocked to find out that it was a young person who was still in high school that would do something like this.
To murder somebody who's 98 years old, to think you could shove a body in that closet. I just can't even.
It absolutely made me think of my own grandma. I just could not imagine her living such a wonderful life and having it end in such a horrific way.
Despite the horror of Margaret's death, her family honors her memory by thinking of her remarkable life.
Margaret gave you an inspiration that you can still be 98 years old and be very functional, live in your own home, take care of yourself. She, to me, was just an inspiration.
She led a full life and could have been longer.
Margaret would want to be remembered as the person who took care of herself, cared about those around her, and was willing to do what she needed to do.
My aunt was Margaret Douglas, and she was a wonderful woman. She was a great woman.
A woman devoted to her town.
She was the deputy county treasurer. Away from the courthouse, you saw a different person. She loved to dance.
Her life snuffed out in a savage attack.
There was quite a bit of blood.
She had been beaten pretty severely.
She had to have been terrified. She struggled at the end of her life.
She had no enemies. Nobody had a clue who would do something like that.
Police investigate several troubling theories.
Is it a close friend that got into an argument with her?
There had been some shouting matches.
Maybe she interrupted a burglary or a theft.
After months of false leads and dead ends,
the town was on high alert.
A stunning discovery breaks open the case.
It added a new twist to the crime.
All of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't know all my neighbors.
And points to a murderer in their midst.
I was kind of speechless at first.
I thought, my gosh. I mean, you just can't believe it.
The tiny farming community of Colon, Nebraska is one of the smallest towns in America, with a population of just over 100 people.
Colon, Nebraska is a very laid-back community, very close-knit families there. I think that if you went there, you would drive through and you go, oh, this is small.
Many people would leave their doors unlocked, their cars unlocked, keys left in the ignition, just a feel of safety, that there's no threat.
But then on June 30th, 2003, police receive a distressing call.
Around 6:42 in the evening, dispatch indicated to me that they had received a report of a possible suicide.
A friend, they ended up finding her body across the street in her garage, along with a gun.
He had called 911, and it was reported as a suicide. Once I arrived, the firemen on scene already were pointing me to a garage. I walked in and could see the body of a white female that was laying on the ground. There was quite a bit of blood, and there was disfigurement to the head and face area, so we could not recognize the victim. A black handgun was found near her head.
There is so much blood on the scene, investigators aren't able to determine the cause of death and need to wait for an autopsy to be sure.
The small black handgun didn't actually contain bullets, and we didn't find any shell casings in the area. The car had a smear on the driver's side, and then I did find that there was a smear of what appeared to be blood on the walk-in door that went out the side of the garage.
There was also what looked like blood spatter, where someone stepped in the pool of blood.
There was a footprint impression that was taken
that indicated that there was a second person there. This was a suspicious death.
There were DNA swabs taken on her body and of her clothing that she was wearing at the time. We noticed that her purse was located underneath her vehicle.
Was this just a botched burglary, or did the person have some other intention?
From the personal items in her purse, police identify the victim as 66-year-old Sharon Erickson.
Sharon was very well known. It was shocking to us as law enforcement to see somebody that was a fixture in the community being the victim in this case.
Born and raised in Nebraska's farm country, Sharon Erickson was a lifelong government worker.
Sharon worked across the hall from me. She was the deputy county treasurer. She was excellent, very honest. I would put her against anybody in the state of Nebraska for knowledge when it comes to the office of the treasurer. She would do anything for you. Gosh darn. When it came to the office or anything, she was always attendant and very, very helpful always.
In 1998, after 37 years of devoted service, Sharon retired.
Away from the courthouse, you saw a different person, more relaxed. She loved to dance, and if anyone wanted to dance, boom, she was on the dance floor. And boy, she was so good at dancing. I'm telling you what, boy, she could dance every dance until they'd shut the music off.
As a single woman, Sharon lived alone, but saw the people of Colon as her family.
People used to go to the bar and have coffee. Well, that one closed. Sharon came over and she says, I have a little front room in my house there. Would you come and remodel it and paint it for me? She had me fix that room up and gave the locals a key for coffee. Had a coffee pot in there. It was just somewhere where they could go. She didn't charge them. That's the type of person that you're talking about.
Police are at a loss when they realize Sharon was attacked just 50 feet away from the gathering spot she gifted to the town. Who could have wanted to kill her and why? Detectives expand their search for evidence to Sharon's home.
She lived in what used to be a grocery store and had converted to her house.
The other odd thing about Sharon's residence is that her garage was located across her house, and so to get to her car, she would have to walk out the front of her house and across Main Street.
What or who could have lured Sharon out of her home and to her death in the garage?
That we did find some damage to the back door that appeared to be consistent with some forced entry.
There was a coal chisel that was found next to the door that more than likely was used.
We also did find that the phone line had been cut.
There was at least some planning on the attack. Someone was obviously trying to prevent her from calling for help.
Inside, there was nothing out of place. When we started going room by room, we found that there was a holster for a small gun in her bedroom near the bed, and the gun was missing. That, along with her bed not being made and the back door having damage and being pried open, We started to have a picture in our minds that this may have occurred in the middle of the night.
Our assumption was that there was a burglary. She was alerted to the burglary because of noise coming from the person prying on the back door, that she got up out of bed, grabbed her gun, and went to investigate what was occurring before she was killed.
As investigators continue to process the scene, they are interrupted by volunteer firefighter and village postmaster Rick Hartman.
He was friends with Sharon. He actually was the one that found her body.
Mr. Hartman appeared to be a little more interested in the situation than some of the other firefighters that were there. Mr. Hartman had to be asked on several different occasions to stay behind the crime scene tape.
After it kept happening, it really alerted a lot of us to, why does he keep doing this? Is there something else going on? Is there something wrong?
Rick's behavior makes officers immediately suspicious, so they approach him for an interview on site.
During the interview, Mr. Hartman had indicated that he was really close friends with Sharon.
When Sharon would leave town, she would leave a key in her post office box for him to check on her house. So he was trusted by her.
Sharon would come visit him every day when she'd come pick up her mail.
But Rick tells police he didn't see Sharon that morning. He was asked to check on her after a worried relative didn't hear from Sharon that evening.
Rick Hartman, he had gone looking for Sharon. Sharon was nowhere to be found.
Mr. Hartman opened the garage door and you could see Sharon laying beside her car.
Without prompting, he indicated that if it was a suicide, that she had a gun, knew how to use it. But we were very confident that there was foul play involved.
When Rick is asked to make a formal statement, his demeanor abruptly changes.
He said, "If you're going to arrest me, otherwise I'm leaving." I was taken aback.
Why would he say that? Why would he do that?
We needed to look a little harder at this person and find out what that was all about.
Coming up, new evidence reveals a disturbing detail.
She'd been sexually assaulted. I was definitely shocked.
Small-town gossip sparks salacious rumors.
There may have been more than just a friendship there.
He was trying to hide additional evidence.
And just when detectives think they have the killer in their sights,
It had to be him.
a startling truth is revealed.
It sent shockwaves through the entire area.
I went, what? You've got to be kidding me.
Police investigating the murder of Sharon Erickson are speaking to her close friend, Rick Hartman. But when they ask him for a statement, Rick suddenly ends the interview.
He was upset that he couldn't leave and finally just told the investigators that, I'm going to leave, and if you want to arrest me, go ahead and arrest me.
That was pretty out of character and uncharacteristic for somebody who had a friend that was just killed. So that immediately caused investigators some concern.
His statements and odd behavior really pointed us in a direction towards the postmaster.
Mr. Hartman gave his alibi. He was at home with his family, and that was confirmed by his wife.
Rick never had any criminal record or had done anything wrong, so there wasn't a great deal of focus on him any more than anybody else.
Rick's on the back burner for now, but investigators will keep him in their sights.
We didn't want to rule anybody out specifically, but we wanted to cast a wide net.
While investigators consider their next move, news of the murder, the first one in 40 years, travels fast.
The town of Colon was buzzing. Well, I got calls, bang, bang, bang. I can't remember who called first. I went, what? That's all I got, and I just was dumbfounded. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. When you hear of someone that you know and you knew for 25, 30 years, it's devastating. Everyone's just shaking their heads saying, how can this happen? How can this happen?
Sharon's death was a big loss for our community. She had known so many people through her work, through her friends, and to not have her in the community anymore, that always creates a hole. Everybody spoke well of her.
She was beloved by the people in the community. We didn't know where to start looking, so we tried to determine anything potentially that could have happened. Is it a close friend that got into an argument with her? Is it a neighbor that maybe didn't like her?
The day after the murder, police canvassed Sharon's neighborhood.
They questioned almost everybody that knew Sharon about, have you heard anything? Do you have any information that can help us? And I said, I have no idea. No idea. She had no enemies. Nobody had a clue who would do something like that. It has to be someone that we don't know. I mean, it has to be someone that came from town.
While we don't have a lot of violent crime in the area, there was definitely one family that lived right behind Sharon that came to mind as somebody that could have been concerning.
The investigators had made contact with Jim Mars. He was an individual that would get into trouble here and there.
He wasn't real responsible. He associated with people that were involved in minor crimes such as burglaries, drug use.
Asked what his relationship with Sharon was, and basically it was just an acquaintance. Mr. Mars would see her occasionally outside of her house when he was going to the post office or on Main Street. They would say hi. He said he got in trouble by her a couple times for mischief when he was younger, and she would yell at him.
When we interviewed Jim Mars, he didn't know anything about Sharon's death, and he was so sorry that she died.
Jim had been in Kansas doing a roofing job. After he got back from Kansas, he eventually went to Wahoo, drank some beer with a friend, attempted to go to another bar. At that time, it was after closing time, and he drove the back roads home to Colon. He estimated he got home about 1:30 in the morning. Stayed up, watched TV, drank a pop, and then eventually went to bed.
His mom confirmed the time that he came home. Everything seemed to be okay with his story.
Investigators don't know the exact time of Sharon's death, so the 24-year-old remains on the suspect list. Before police leave, Jim gives them a tip.
Jim had indicated that there was a trucker that always had interactions and always seemed to be bickering with Miss Erickson. The truck driver may have parked a little bit on her property and she'd get upset about it. He might have his engine running on his truck and it would bother her.
She would bring it to his attention, and he would not necessarily comply with her request.
It was no secret the two didn't get along.
We were gaining information from friends that Sharon had had disputes with this man.
Detectives must now determine if a run-in with the trucker turned fatal.
A lot of the community members felt that the truck driver was doing things to antagonize her and to cause more problems between them.
That was something that was public because there had been some shouting matches, some vocal exchanges about the fact that this truck was running all night.
Some of the people in the community who knew that he wasn't overly fond with Sharon, they kind of rumored him to be a suspect.
Maybe the frustration amongst the two had just finally boiled over. It just seemed suspicious.
I know the investigators had attempted to reach out to the truck driver in question and were unable to contact him.
Police do all they can, but can't track down the driver's whereabouts.
Today's technology is there's cameras everywhere. You're using your cell phone. At the time of this homicide, that kind of technology wasn't prevalent.
We didn't know if we were going to find that person.
Is Sharon Erickson's murderer on the run?
That's concerning. That was on the minds of probably all the citizens in this area. And probably the scariest thing for law enforcement in the community is that person likely to offend again?
Police hunting the killer of 66-year-old Sharon Erickson have a new suspect, a truck driver she had clashed with several times.
Had something escalated from vocal argument to some other level.
Now, detectives fear the trucker has fled the area.
We went door to door, asked people if they saw the truck driver. No one had any information about him, and it didn't appear we were any further along than we were the night we got there, and the town was on high alert.
There's a murderer out there. It's hard to contemplate. Hard to contemplate.
A week after Sharon's murder, detectives received the autopsy results.
The report did indicate that the death would have occurred sometime, most likely that night or the early morning hours of the day that she was found.
The medical examiner indicated that there was no gunshot wounds, that the gun had not been used in the commission of the crime.
The pathologist ruled the cause of death to be asphyxiation along with blunt force trauma.
It was found that Sharon had been beaten pretty severely. She had also been strangled. She also suffered some broken ribs and had some defensive wounds on her hands from fighting off her attacker.
The autopsy contains one more disturbing detail.
She had a small vaginal tear as well, which indicated that she'd been sexually assaulted. I was definitely shocked that there was a sexual assault involved.
Totally unexpected. It added a new twist to the crime, which further led to more questions. It really makes you feel for the victim. She had to have been terrified for those few minutes that she struggled at the end of her life.
During the autopsy, her underwear were taken for possible examination for DNA, this being pretty early in the DNA process in the early 2000s. We waited.
2 days later, on July 10th, the trucker is back in town and police bring him in for questioning.
He's not overly cooperative. He was reluctant to give any details about where he was, what he was doing.
Detectives press the trucker on his relationship with Sharon.
The truck driver wouldn't have called Sharon a friend. He felt irritated by the way she would overreact, I believe is how he termed it.
He did not have a good relationship with her.
But the truck driver vows he's no killer.
He told us he was out of town at the time of the homicide. He was in Wyoming or Colorado. He was hundreds of miles away and had receipts to prove it. Officers were sent off to corroborate the receipt. He was asked for a DNA sample and a polygraph, and he refused.
Was the trucker hiding something?
It's just one of the things that you can add to a list of items that if there's too many on that list, it's a problem.
With nothing concrete linking the trucker to the homicide, detectives have to let him go.
Law enforcement officers were in the process of interviewing and chasing down alibis.
We'd been following up with people, but there was not a lot of new information coming in and not a lot of credible information.
With Sharon's murder still unsolved, the community remains on high alert.
Before this happened, it was probably one of the safest places you'd want to be. Everyone's on their toes. You know, you drive up, you lock your car, you lock your house, you watch everything. Here's a lady that just retired, 60-some years old. Who could do this? It just was a shock to the whole county.
As a community, you want resolution, or you at least want to know why it happened and how can we get some justice out of this.
Although the entire town is mourning the loss of Sharon, Rick Hartman seems to be taking an unnaturally keen interest in the investigation.
Rick would ask us about what we were doing about other leads, and then he would insert his thoughts.
His behavior was a little more pushy, trying to get as much information as Rick could.
Is this just a concerned friend who wants to see how the investigation's going, or is there something more to than that?
Despite his odd behavior, Rick still has a solid alibi, and the investigation stalls.
We decided that we all needed to get back together and just have like a brainstorm session and say, what do we do? One of the things that we talked about is at the time of the homicide, early 2000s, meth had been a problem.
People would steal anhydrous ammonia from tanks and then use that to create their own methamphetamine.
Some of these people were heavy addicts, very dangerous, and involved in a lot of crimes.
One of the things that was being discussed with the anhydrous tanks was they were not too far from Sharon's home. So could she have seen something? Could she have spotted something, said something to make someone believe that she knew who they were and what they were doing?
Did Sharon confront them? Did they attack her to keep her quiet?
We might be looking for somebody who's manufacturing and selling methamphetamine who may have been in Colon on that particular night.
Five weeks after Sharon Erickson is savagely beaten to death, detectives investigate whether she had been killed by a criminal gang manufacturing illegal drugs near her home.
It's an easy target, no cameras in that area. We were aware that Sharon kept an eye on Main Street. She a lot of times had information about suspicious people, something going on after hours there.
Sharon was one that if she saw something that she didn't think was right, she wasn't afraid to stand up and say something.
Maybe she saw something that she shouldn't have. She interrupted a burglary or a theft. As we talked to people around town, they also indicated that that might have been one of the reasons why Sharon may have been murdered.
Investigators had talked to local suspects who were involved in the manufacturing of methamphetamine. People that we had arrested previous to this incident, and then people from the metro areas. Most of them have pretty extensive criminal records, and they're heavily addicted. So the level of cooperation with somebody who's addicted to methamphetamine is not going to be very good.
It creates a difficult picture to paint. We were not able to generate the type of evidence or leads that we really would hope for.
We as a department were frustrated with things not happening real fast and the way that you always want.
The canvas fails to yield the information police were looking for, as does the investigation into the trucker.
As the investigation unfolded, the truck driver was eliminated. He was miles and miles away from the incident. We contacted the establishment where he got fuel, and it wasn't a phony receipt.
With this, the driver is fully off the suspect list.
After doing the first set of interviews and looking at potential suspects, the investigators really weren't able to focus on anybody that would be so mad or somebody that would want to sexually assault Sharon or to kill her. So it kind of left a lot of question marks. Where do you go? What do you look for? There's just a lot of unknowns.
We just don't know what's going on. Do we feel safe or do we need to worry?
Everybody had their ideas who did this, and I think it just kept going and going and going. People didn't have a clue, but they wanted to talk about it.
There was a lot of discussion amongst the community members as to what was going on, a lot of rumors floating around.
One of these rumors that starts circulating has to do with one of Sharon's good friends and a familiar name to detectives.
Because of Rick's close contact with Sharon, small town rumors began to surface that there may have been more than just a friendship there.
Many of the community members had mentioned rumors that Rick Hartman and Sharon had been having an affair.
We start to wonder, was there more to their friendship, maybe in a romantic way?
There was talk. This was something that was being discussed. So it's not that hard of a thought process or big of a leap to say, could he be involved?
Police talked to Rick again, this time at the sheriff's office.
He was cooperative. He somehow, I think, liked the attention.
But that changes when detectives ask Rick some very pointed questions.
Law enforcement actually asked him if there was a romantic relationship between the two of them.
He was immediately offended, and he denied that.
Mr. Hartman appeared to be very distraught. He said he was just friends with her, that there was no romantic relationship.
Could the sexual assault that appeared in Sharon's autopsy actually have been a consensual encounter with Rick?
That question certainly seems accusatory. Those things are not comfortable, but that comes with the job. You got to do your job. Rick was questioned in detail and really scrutinized on where he was, what his involvement was. There were a number of times he said, we got to look somewhere else because we were wasting our time on him.
He became agitated and wanted to go home.
Rick stands by the alibi he gave police back when they first questioned him 7 weeks ago at the crime scene.
Rick was home with his wife at the time that we believe Sharon was killed.
The investigators went and corroborated his story with his wife again.
We really had no reason to believe that Rick's wife would not disclose if he were gone at that time. Even though there were a lot of things that kind of pointed to him, he had a pretty good alibi.
With no hard evidence against Rick, detectives have to let him go, but not before getting one thing.
We collected DNA from Mr. Hartman.
We talked a little about it, and he says, but Don, I didn't do it. But again, you always have that doubt, you know, what happened?
There was just speculation and suspicion.
2 months after Sharon's murder, detectives finally receive results from the forensics lab.
They had tried to do analysis on some of the items which were collected at autopsy to come up with a DNA profile.
Will this be the break detectives have been hoping for?
We were really needing something such as that to come through for us.
Two months after the murder of Sharon Erickson, police hope the DNA results they've been waiting for will confirm who they suspect is her killer.
There was quite a bit of speculation that it could be the postmaster in town.
We were contacted by our state patrol lab. They believed that there was something there, but that they could not separate out a complete profile for comparison. It was kind of frustrating to know that there may be something there, but that maybe it was a dead end that we couldn't get past.
Without a DNA match, we as investigators knew that if that was the case, it would be very hard to solve this crime.
But detectives aren't giving up.
The Nebraska Medical Center could test smaller quantities than the State Patrol Lab could do. So we made the determination that we would take our evidence and send it in to the other lab and have more DNA testing done.
Results will take months to come back. And with a killer still on the loose, nerves in small-town Colon, Nebraska begin to fray.
When the investigation went on and on and on, I thought, come on, we've got to find something. We had a murder back in 69 or 68 that was never solved in Wahoo. And of course, right away, you think, gosh, we got to find out who did this.
Could it be someone we do know? There can be a mistrust. All of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't know all my neighbors.
Then, police receive an unexpected tip that points back to the man they can't seem to rule out.
The estate of Sharon Erickson had a garage sale, and Rick Hartman was at the garage sale.
Mr. Hartman went in and purchased her mattress, and that was suspicious to us. If there was some sort of maybe DNA evidence or something that would be on the mattress that would be of interest to law enforcement, by somebody purchasing that and maybe getting rid of it, then it would be something that we would no longer be able to go back and utilize at a later time.
Did he want the mattress because they did have potential sexual activity on the mattress? Maybe he was out there trying to hide additional evidence. Every time investigators seemed to close a loophole with Mr. Hartman, something else happened. He kept drawing attention to him. It was just another thing that brought him back on radar.
Law enforcement asked him about his attendance there and what he bought. He actually denied that he bought her mattress. So then that caused law enforcement some concern on why would you buy it? Okay, why, if you did buy it, why would you lie about it?
Mr. Hartman agreed to undergo a polygraph, so he cooperated in that aspect, but he seemed nervous, on edge, jittery. The results from that polygraph were inconclusive. It left a lot of questions unanswered. It just added a little fuel to the fire.
Every chance that we could get that he could clear his name seemed to be something that elevated him to the next level.
The people in town were thinking it had to be him and were scared to go to the post office.
In a small community where pretty much everybody knows everybody, it's easy to point fingers, it's easy to cast doubts.
I golfed with Rick Hartman that week in our golf league, and he was just nervous, he was just edgy and just scared.
A number of us may have felt like Mr. Hartman had acted inappropriately or suspiciously. We just didn't have enough to really push it over the top.
There was nothing that we could charge him with. We had no evidence that he committed the crime, other than he kept interjecting himself in the investigation.
Detectives hope that definitive proof will come from the Medical Center Forensic Lab.
The last piece that we didn't have back yet was the DNA evidence.
We got a phone call, and they were able to isolate a DNA profile.
They actually located a sperm cell on her clothing, which was a positive breakthrough for us. The only person that it could have been from would have been the person that had sexually assaulted her and presumably killed her.
We felt that there was more hope in solving this than we had had for quite a while, because at least DNA is something that we can link to a specific person.
Armed with this DNA profile, police immediately zero in on their top suspect.
We did send in Rick Hartman's DNA. Came back not a match.
Rick's name is finally cleared from the suspect list once and for all.
Scientific evidence is what it is. It confirmed everything that he was telling us. There was no romantic relationship.
We were focused on an individual that had absolutely nothing to do with the homicide. I apologize for any stress we caused him or his family.
But if it wasn't Rick, then who killed Sharon?
One of the big concerns that we had is that if this was a stranger that was maybe passing through town, or someone completely not associated with the community or with Sharon, that it potentially could go unsolved without any additional evidence coming forward.
Investigators are back to square one, but they come up with a new game plan.
We try to determine who else should we go out and collect samples from, who else were potential suspects, who could have done this, and who would provide those samples so we can send them in and see if there's a match.
It was just a matter of being able to find that one person out there in the world that that belonged to. We're trying to get that needle in a haystack.
10 months after Sharon's murder, in April 2004, police get the results of their DNA dragnet.
The lab got a confirmation that they had a match.
We now know who killed Sharon. It was the breakthrough that we needed.
It sent shockwaves through the entire area.
Almost a year after the murder of Sharon Erickson, police have matched DNA from the crime scene to her killer.
The DNA came back and it matched Jim Mars.
James lived nearby to Sharon. He was one of the people that police talked to early on.
Jim had known Sharon nearly all his life.
He had helped her out when he was younger, doing some yard work or snow removal.
I was kind of speechless at first because he had no problem providing his DNA to law enforcement.
I was shocked to find out that James Mars was the perpetrator. We had never seen that type of violence out of him.
Once we had a DNA match with Jim, we needed to figure out where the holes in his alibi are.
When we originally interviewed Jim Mars, he said he'd been out in a bar in Wahoo and later went home. The bartender believed the timeline that Jim had given us was fairly accurate.
Jim's mother stands by her story, too.
I think those alibis were solid, but they didn't cover him for the whole evening. What I think happened is he was home and left. He lived right across the back alley from Sharon's house. And even if he would have been home, that doesn't mean he didn't leave his house. The determination was that we did have enough evidence to proceed with the arrest and prosecution of Jim.
We went to his residence very early in the morning, and he answered the door, and we placed him under arrest. He was shocked that he was being arrested, that he was considered the suspect. We brought him in to interview him.
Police try to establish a motive.
That was one of the unique things in this case, to find out and even just try to resolve that big why. Why would that even happen?
He was reluctant to give any details. There were a number of times he said, "I don't remember." He sobbed at times.
He said he didn't have anything to do with it, denied that he had any involvement. When asked about the sexual assault, he stated that Sharon was an old lady and he wouldn't do that. And from that point on, he stated he wanted an attorney, and we stopped our questioning.
We had filed charges for first-degree homicide, sexual assault.
News of his arrest hits the community hard.
This was very unexpected. I thought, my gosh, something's wrong here. I mean, you just can't believe it. I was hoping that they'd catch someone that I did not know the family.
The reaction in town was split. There was definitely a thought that, oh, it couldn't have been him that did it. And then there were supporters that, well, we thought maybe it was him.
While investigators are confident that DNA evidence will be enough to get a conviction, they get even more ammunition against Jim.
We had at least 5 inmates come forward with information that Mr. Mars had confessed to them. He struck her, strangled her, killed her. These inmates were going to testify against him, that he had confessed to them.
With this information, investigators piece together what happened the night of the murder.
Jim was at the bar, like he said. He had a few too many drinks at some point, went home. He wasn't able to sleep.
From what he told the other inmates, he was looking for some money. He thought Sharon may be an easy target. He was just going to burglarize her house.
He climbed over Sharon's fence in the backyard, cut her phone line so she wouldn't be able to call anybody, pried her back door open, and ended up kicking the door in order to go see if he could find her purse or find some money that was laying around.
Once that back door was kicked in, Sharon woke up.
He was confronted by Sharon, who was holding a gun and threatened to shoot him at that point if he didn't leave.
Sharon went to call 911, and her phone line was dead. She kept her cell phone in her car for emergencies.
Sharon ran across the street to get into her car. Jim chased her down, caught her, and ended up attacking her.
He punched her and then eventually choked her to death.
There was a sexual assault. He refused to talk to the inmates about that.
Had he not sexually assaulted her and we didn't have any DNA, we would never have it solved when you have a sperm cell that was a perfect match. There's nobody else that could be responsible.
The chance of this being another person was out of this world. With the evidence we had, this was a slam dunk for his conviction.
On August 15th, 2005, Jim Mars pleads guilty to second-degree murder. He is sentenced to life with no possibility of parole.
When I found out there was a sexual assault that went along with the slaying, I was just furious. What kind of person would do something like this? You've got to be kidding me. And the community was appalled. I was happy that we finally got closure. He did it. He's locked up.
Sharon was the one that suffered the ultimate loss. And that's what the investigators put in all those hours of work for and give her her last voice.
Sharon's presence is missed in Colon to this day.
To not have her in the community, that's tough. There's pain and sadness.
Sharon loved her community. Yes, she did. She was very good to my kids and very good to me and my family. Really a good lady.
A beloved former school teacher and wife of a small-town mayor.
Charlotte was very compassionate about students and very well liked.
She was a wonderful mother.
Found murdered in her home.
It inflamed the community because of how popular she was.
Detectives find evidence of a violent struggle.
She had been savagely attacked.
You could see that her wrist was broke.
Who would kill this loving wife and mother?
There was nobody that you could think of that would want her dead. It's going to be one of those cases of a whodunit.
Suspicions run rampant in this small town.
People are trying to help the police crack this case, but it's just all of these rumors and innuendo. Somebody was at a party bragging about killing Charlotte. He was spending money like it was going out of style. A lady reported that her boyfriend tried to strangle her. We're thinking that's a very good suspect.
Police close in, but a public accusation upends the case.
He gave a statement on live radio accusing him of the murder.
They said they finally realized who killed her.
He was in shock.
I never would have expected them to be a suspect that will haunt me for the rest of my life.
Lynette, Alabama, a small family-oriented town in the heart of the Deep South.
Lynette was a mill town. It sits right on the banks of the Chattahoochee River, one of Alabama's major waterways. I always felt safe when I was there.
Some people would leave their homes unlocked, but we just never had any crime there.
Lynette is a very tight-knit area. Everybody knows everybody here.
August 4th, 1998 was a lazy summer day in Lynette until the peace was shattered by a 911 call.
It was around 5:30 when we got the call of an unresponsive woman.
Police are surprised to learn the call has come from the home of the town's mayor.
Everyone was shocked that it was their house, and I was there within 2 or 3 minutes.
The 911 caller, Heather Waits, leads police inside to her unresponsive mother.
Heather was very hysterical, and the first thing she could say was, "Help my mom." The first thing I did was go and check for a pulse, and she was cool to the touch. And you could tell that she's been expired for a little while.
Police are stunned to find Charlotte Waits, the wife of the town's mayor, dead in her home. At first, it appears that Charlotte has suffered a tragic accident.
We noticed she did have a little foam coming out the corner of her mouth, so we thought that, maybe had a seizure or a reaction to a medicine.
As detectives look closer, they begin to suspect foul play.
There were red flags that this was more than just an accident.
Her right arm in the wrist area appeared to be broken. She had what appeared to be scratch marks on the bottom of her chin and she had some red markings around her neck. We made a decision right then that we're going to proceed with a homicide investigation.
Detectives find signs of a violent struggle.
There was a picture that had been knocked off the wall. We could see the nail that was holding that picture up was bent down towards the stairway. So my theory is that it was a fight coming down the stairs. It just looked suspicious.
The fact that her purse was dumped over, but her purse was still there. You couldn't tell if it was a stage scene or if somebody had come in and she had interrupted a burglary.
Was Charlotte the victim of a robbery gone wrong, or did her killer want it to appear that way?
We didn't see any signs of forced entry. One of the investigators went to the utility room and found 2 bloody towels. So we want to find out who might have bled on those towels.
As forensics collect evidence, Charlotte's husband, Barry, arrives on the scene.
Barry had worked at the National Guard Armory. At the time, Barry was the acting mayor.
The look on his face, he was in shock. He was very, very upset.
He started hyperventilating, grabbing his chest. He began to go into what we thought was a heart attack.
As Barry is rushed to the hospital, news of Charlotte's murder spreads.
I remember the state of shock that I felt. When I got down there to the emergency room, the girls were there, and of course they were upset. Their mother was dead, and their daddy was under doctor's care for heart issues.
Investigators turned to Charlotte's daughters for information about their mother.
Charlotte was a very kind, gentle person, always smiling, and cared about others.
Charlotte studied education at Auburn University and got married to Barry Waits right after graduating in 1971.
She was a second-grade teacher. She was very compassionate about her students and just very well liked.
Later, Charlotte became a devoted school administrator.
She was genuine through and through. She just made such a nice reputation for herself in the school system and in the community as well. Barry was head of the National Guard Armory, and he would often let us use the armory for the science fair, social studies fair. And Charlotte, she was always there helping me with everything.
Charlotte and Barry had the perfect marriage. 2 great careers, and they had 2 daughters. Heather was going to college, and Kara was still in high school, getting ready to graduate.
When you was around them, you could feel the love. They were well respected in this community.
Charlotte was a wonderful mother. I could tell what a deep love she had for her family.
Who would take the life of this kind and caring woman, and why? Detectives question Heather about how she came to find her mother's body.
Heather came home for the weekend. As a college kid, it's time to get your clothes washed and get some good home cooking.
Heather said she came into the house, and then when she called out for her mom, and that's when she noticed her mom at the bottom of the stairs. And when she run up to her, she realized that she wasn't breathing.
And when she felt cold, she began to panic. And then that's when she called the ambulance. And then she called her dad.
Police are eager to question the mayor, but doctors say they want to keep him overnight for observation.
We did find out that he didn't have a heart attack. It was an anxiety-type situation. But we were never able to talk to Barry while he was in the hospital. He got out the next day. On Saturday morning following the murder, we were at the office, myself, the other investigators, and then all of a sudden Barry walks in.
When it's this type of murder, it's usually someone very close to him at the same time. Nobody would ever suspect the mayor of doing anything like this. Anyone that knew Barry knew that he's like a big teddy bear.
My knowledge of Barry at that point, I'd never seen him upset. He was just friendly and well-respected. Barry didn't fit any kind of profile to do this kind of crime. But we did take the opportunity to just look over him while we were talking to him, see if we could see any visible injuries, and we could not.
Barry offers to help with the investigation and agrees to be interviewed. Detectives ask him for his whereabouts the previous day.
He told us that the morning he had gone to the armory, just had a normal day. Around 11 or so, he left the armory and gone by the barbershop. He said it was full, so he went back to work the rest of the day until he received a phone call from his daughter telling him that she had found her mother. So he rushed home.
Investigators hope to verify the mayor's alibi, but they haven't established a clear timeline for Charlotte's murder.
The first day of business after the homicide, the only thing we had was a victim in a neighborhood that these things don't happen. It's going to be one of those cases of a whodunit.
Nobody disliked Miss Waits, and there was definitely nobody that you could think of that would want her dead.
As fear grips the town of Lynette, suspicion starts to fall on someone close to Charlotte's daughter.
Through talking to family, we had learned that Kara was dating a boy that her parents really didn't like because he was living a rough life, hand to mouth. Barry and Charlotte both told her that she was not going to see him. And then, of course, they learned that she was seeing him behind their back. At the time of the murder, Kara was still in high school and she was pregnant. I believe that Charlotte knew that Kara was pregnant.
Investigators wonder if there had been a deadly confrontation between Charlotte and her daughter's lover.
People have been killed for less. Maybe he thought, hey, I want to see your daughter, you're not letting me, so you're going to pay for it.
Coming up, the list of suspects grows.
People start calling the tip lines or saying, well, so-and-so told me so-and-so.
And small-town secrets are revealed.
He had been to prison for violent crimes.
People are starting to say, you're maybe not the person we thought that you were.
Then, new evidence stuns investigators.
He's got a money issue, and that's a flag.
But the prints did not match.
I can't put this behind me until it's solved.
You may think that you know who did the crime, but you may be wrong.
Just 24 hours into the investigation of Charlotte Waite's murder, police have their first suspect. Her 17-year-old daughter's boyfriend.
We had learned that at the time of the murder, Kara was pregnant.
Her boyfriend just wasn't the person that they wanted their daughter to be dating. So maybe there had been some type of conflict.
Police bring him into the station for questioning.
He told us that he knew that Barry and Charlotte didn't like him, but he said that the day of the murder, he was working with a grass cutting crew somewhere. We were able to go to the person that he was working for that day, and they verified his whereabouts through the entire day of the murder.
With Kara's boyfriend looking unlikely as the killer, detectives take a closer look at Kara.
The day of the murder of Kara, we determined that she was at work babysitting. Then we started looking at Heather. We were able to show that she was at Auburn University. She had actually left 20, 30 minutes prior to finding her mother. We eliminated her.
It's been less than 2 days since Charlotte Waits was found dead, and the investigation is under intense scrutiny from the public and the media.
We did have a lot of pressure put on us from the beginning because it's the mayor's wife. He's a pillar of the community, and she's a pillar of the community.
With this case being such a high-profile nature, there was a lot of eyes looking at us.
I was the host of the morning show on WRLD radio. We were getting calls from people all over the county. I knew Charlotte's family real well. There was so much speculation at the time.
Under the close watch of the media, police turn their attention back to the mayor's alibi.
On any homicide, when your victim is married, you will start inside and then you work your way out. We wanted to find out the timeline of his whereabouts to eliminate him as being a suspect.
Barry claims that on the day of the murder, he left work around 11:30 a.m. to run an errand, then returned.
Barry said that once he got back to the armory, that he sent a fax to his commander We traveled to Birmingham to verify who he sent the fax to, and it showed us that Barry got back to the armory at the time that he said he did.
Police confirm Barry's fax receipt has a 12:30 p.m. timestamp, but investigators still don't know the exact time of Charlotte's murder. While they wait for the autopsy results, they hope Charlotte's coworkers can help provide the answer.
The people that Charlotte worked with told us that Charlotte had gotten to work that morning, and that afternoon they were having a baby shower for one of her coworkers. They told us that she left around 11 or so.
And she comes home to get fixed up to go out to the little baby shower.
They told us that they were getting ready to order out lunch and try to get in touch with her to find out what she wanted. Couldn't get an answer.
No one saw Charlotte again until Heather discovered her body nearly 6 hours later.
Our office was horrified. We just couldn't wrap our minds around the fact that our little ray of sunshine was dead. Sergeant Richard Carter was asking us a lot of questions, like, did Charlotte and Barry get along? Charlotte and Barry were always teasing with each other, and he was always being silly and funny, and she would roll her eyes at him, and they didn't appear to have any problems. We said what a wonderful husband he had been and what a good daddy.
Investigators hope to get more information about Barry and Charlotte's relationship from their daughters.
We want to find out more about the dynamics of the family. But when the daughters realized that we were looking at their father as the suspect, they became upset with us. So they broke contact, and we lost contact with them. When we were speaking to her friends and her family, nobody could provide anyone who could have a reason to kill Charlotte.
Hitting dead ends, investigators dig deeper and begin to look beyond Charlotte's immediate family. They request an interview with her brother, Gene.
Gene said he loved his sister tremendously, and her entire family. He talked about him and Barry being like brothers.
Then, Gene reveals a key piece of information.
Charlotte had an uncle that had passed away. Written into the inheritance, Charlotte got 50%.
And we're talking several hundred acres here, which is worth a good bit of money. At this time, they're starting to build auto manufacturing areas here, and you can get lots of money for selling land or land rights.
Gene tells police that the inheritance caused problems in the extended family.
There was this cousin who felt like he deserved part of that estate. So he was contesting the will.
I've actually had to try murder cases where people have shot each other over property lines, and that's nothing compared to thousands and thousands of dollars worth of property. And so you've got heightened tension.
Gene also tells investigators that Charlotte was due to meet her attorney about the inheritance on the day she was killed.
We don't believe in coincidence that on the day she was supposed to have a meeting with an attorney is the day that she was murdered. And at that point, Charlotte's cousin became suspect number one.
Detectives investigating the murder of Charlotte Waits have discovered she was about to inherit a large tract of land from her uncle, leaving another family member angry.
Charlotte's cousin, Wayne Rice, felt that he was entitled to part of it, and we're talking a substantial good bit of property.
She did not like conflict. And the day of the murder, she was supposed to have a meeting with an attorney. Of course, she never made the meeting.
Detectives want to know if Wayne went to Charlotte's home to confront her before the meeting.
Maybe he thought if she was eliminated, he would have more opportunity for him to get more money out of it. When we contacted Wayne, he agreed to meet with us, but not without his attorney present.
Police ask Wayne how he feels about being left out of the family inheritance.
He knew that disputing that will caused broken relationships, but he said that he didn't wish any ill will on Charlotte.
Investigators ask for his whereabouts on the day of the murder.
Wayne had told us that he had gone to work early that morning. He'd gotten off work, gone home. We wanted to find out, did he have any opportunity to come to Lynette, commit the murder? and leave with nobody seeing him. We talked to 3 of his co-workers, and they confirmed that he never left, didn't even leave for lunch.
With Wayne ruled out, police go back to the drawing board.
Once we were able to eliminate Wayne, we were kind of left, again, at point A. Who could commit this crime and leave and nobody see anything out of the ordinary?
2 weeks after Charlotte's murder, detectives received the autopsy report.
The pathologist explained that it was a strangulation.
The report concludes that the murder weapon was a piece of Charlotte's own clothing.
Miss Waits had on a blouse that kind of had the little strings that went across it. And those strings actually created the ligature mark around her neck. And were pulled from behind.
The autopsy also confirms that Charlotte suffered other injuries in the attack.
She was thrown to the floor in such a violent manner that she suffered a dislocated wrist and a head injury that by itself could have killed her.
And the report suggests that Charlotte was struck in the face.
The doctor felt like she was punched, which could have subdued her.
The blood on the towels found at the scene is identified as Charlotte's.
The bloody towels were kind of stuck down in the bottom and covered up, like somebody was trying to hide them.
I would have to describe the last few minutes of Charlotte's life as complete terror. She had been savagely attacked.
Police receive the crime scene fingerprint analysis and discover a print that doesn't belong.
And we get the fingerprint report back, and then there's some unidentified fingerprints. We can't put a suspect with those fingerprints.
Police run the prints through the Alabama State Database, but it doesn't produce a match.
This is so frustrating because you owe it to the victim's family to go make that arrest and always hoping that we're going to get that silver bullet that's going to put it all together, and you never get it.
Then, just a few days later, a local report of a violent assault draws detectives' attention.
Our patrol guys got a call one night to a residence in regards to a lady that called and reported that her boyfriend, Rodney Borum, tried to strangle her. When the officer wrote up the report, he said, "This looks awfully familiar to the case that you're working on."
Detectives interview the victim and are struck by the similarities in the attack.
She reported to the police officers that her boyfriend attacked her from behind, tried to strangle her, but she was able to get away from him.
We knew Miss Waits had been choked from behind, so you have to look at that.
Is this an isolated case or an ongoing pattern of violent attacks?
We realized that he had actually had a pretty extensive criminal history from another state. He had been to prison numerous times for violent type crimes. So we were extremely interested in Rodney.
Police obtain Rodney's prints from the Georgia State Database.
We sent those off to the crime lab to compare with the prints that were lifted at the crime scene. When we spoke to Rodney, it was explained to him that this crime looked a lot like what took place with Charlotte. So he knew without a doubt why we were questioning him.
As police look into Rodney's claim that he was working on the day of the murder, the lab comes back with fingerprint results.
We got notified that Rodney Borum's prints did not match. And through his alibi, we were able to eliminate him from being in the area that day.
Police can't charge Rodney for the alleged assault on his girlfriend due to lack of evidence, so they let him go. Once again, the investigation hits a dead end.
You have to keep an open mind. Always be ready for something that's going to take you down a different path.
A few days later, a stunning piece of information comes in on the police tip line.
We'd gotten a tip that there was a man at a party bragging about killing Charlotte.
The tipster claims he overheard someone named Kenny Boyd confess to the crime.
He said that he had been at a party with Kenny Boyd, and that Kenny Boyd had told him that he had gone in to rob Miss Waits, and that she caught him burglarizing the house.
We thought this is what we needed. This is the tip that we need. It's going to get us where we need to be.
When police go to locate Kenny, they don't have to look very far.
When we went and found him, he was inside our county jail.
It's been almost 2 months since the murder of Charlotte Waits, and a witness claims he recently overheard Kenny Boyd confess to the crime.
We were told that Kenny Boyd was at a party bragging about killing Charlotte.
The witness also tells police that Kenny had an accomplice.
Kenny told them that they were breaking in Charlotte's house. Then Charlotte came home. They jumped her, killed her. Didn't mean to kill her, but did.
The two suspects are well known to police.
They were always in trouble, in and out of jail.
Detectives head to Lynette County Jail, where Kenny has been in custody for several days on an unrelated charge.
We got inside the jail, sat down in a cell, began interviewing Kenny Boyd. He said he didn't know her, and he said he did not commit the murder. He said, I don't even know where they live, but we want to find out what it was he did that day. Kenny begins to tell us that they are out going to a local store, stealing cigarettes, and then they're going into a different part of town, selling them for crack.
Detectives are skeptical of the account and want to hear what Kenny's partner in crime has to say.
We find out that the other suspect's in prison in Georgia. So we traveled into Georgia, and he tells us basically the same story. He says, yeah, we were stealing cigarettes.
With identical stories from two suspects, investigators look to confirm their alibi.
To verify his alibi, the only thing we can do is go to the store that he said that they were stealing cigarettes from.
Police search the store's security footage for proof the men were there.
At the time of the murder, it was documented on video that they are inside that store that he said they were in. It was very frustrating. You may think that you know who did the crime, but you may be wrong.
Later on, we found out the guy that had called the tip line on Kenny Boyd just basically didn't like Mr. Boyd.
Police are increasingly concerned that the tip line may be doing more harm than good.
That's the thing about a small town, and everybody knows everybody, and people start calling the tip lines saying, well, so-and-so told me so-and-so.
Through this entire case, we would continually get tips. At times we felt like they were good tips, credible. Other times we knew that they were just trying to meddle in the case. The hardest thing was all the different rabbit trails that we kept having to go down because every single tip that we got, we had to chase it.
That's slowing the investigation down to a crawl because at a trial, you've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody committed this crime. And to do that, you've got to disprove all of these bad tips and the rumors and innuendo.
With the investigation at a standstill, the public is increasingly angry that no arrest has been made in the 6 months since Charlotte's murder.
The people in this community were frightened. Any murder in a small town, people here know everybody, so you got a lot of pressure when you got a case like this.
The fact that Charlotte was so well known inflamed the community. I think there was a lot of angst because of how popular she was and how gentle she was.
Our hearts still ached. It was awful. I would go to her grave and wonder if your murderer comes here and looks. And at this grave, she was my dear friend. And I can't put this behind me until it's solved.
3 years after Charlotte's murder, a bizarre development puts the case back in the spotlight.
Barry was on our city council, and Barry decided to run for re-election. Well, there was a gentleman who lived in the county who decided to run against Barry.
The person running for city council against Barry Waits at that time, his name was Rod Spraggins.
Rod was a bail bondsman. He was very well known throughout the community.
While on the campaign trail, Rod Spraggins makes a stunning statement in the local press.
Rod was quoted in the paper as saying that he was 100% convinced that Barry Waits had killed Charlotte.
Three years after the murder of Charlotte Waits, Rod Spraggins has publicly declared that he knows who killed her.
Rod said Charlotte came to me in a dream and told me that Barry's the one that killed her.
Rod Spraggins gave a statement on live radio accusing Barry of the murder. And we got a lot of calls on that, you know. You got people openly saying it on the radio. Why can't y'all make an arrest?
Rod's comments raise eyebrows, but police are suspicious of his motives.
I think it might not have been taken as seriously knowing it was Rod.
Rod Spraggins he's a con man. One of those that just stirred up stuff. And I don't know what his intent was, but in our eyes as investigators, Rod had no evidence.
But then, Rod's rash allegation sparks an unexpected development in the case. As talk about Barry Waits spreads, new rumors emerge about a hidden and disturbing side of the former mayor.
I kept hearing these rumors. Barry was the caretaker of his mother's savings account. And it was my understanding that out of $100,000, there was $100 and some change left in the account.
We found out that his mother was actually losing her house. And people were starting to look at him going, man, you're maybe not the person we thought that you were.
Police decide to take a closer look at Barry's finances.
As we're pulling banking records, I discover where Barry had taken $12,000 out of his mother's account, put it into his personal account, and spent the money. And this had been prior to the murder. So I think he's stealing from his mother. Where did the money go?
You know, if you'll steal from your mother, you'll steal from anybody.
Further analysis of Barry's bank records lead police to suspect that Barry is hiding an illicit source of income.
We need to find out where he's stealing money from. So, start another side investigation into his financial dealings at work.
Investigators interview Barry's superior at the National Guard Armory.
The commander was telling me that Barry really doesn't have any way to steal money, but they're allowed to rent out the armory for weddings and stuff like that. The commander, he said, but he hasn't rented this thing out in quite a while.
Investigators find that Barry had been renting out the armory without notifying his superiors.
Barry was using his position to rent the armory out, and then he was holding the money on his own, and that actually amounted up to a pretty substantial amount.
Barry had worked for the National Guard Armory for at least 20 years. When they realized that he was stealing money from them, they were in shock. They couldn't believe it.
Barry agrees to talk to police about the alleged embezzlement.
We went to interview him in regards to the theft. He confessed right away about the theft, gave us a full statement. We indicted him, and he ended up working out a plea bargain agreement. And he was sentenced to 6 months in jail.
With Barry temporarily behind bars, investigators shift their focus to one crucial question. Could his greed and financial desperation have had something to do with Charlotte's murder?
Just because you're a thief doesn't make you a murderer, but because you need money real bad, that is motive for you to kill somebody. Barry's got a money issue, and that's a flag.
Police discover a pattern of behavior that began years prior, during his marriage to Charlotte.
At the time of the murder, they were behind on several payments, car payments, telephone. They were behind in their utility bills. Although we don't know where the money's going, couldn't determine if Barry had a girlfriend or anything. Couldn't find any gambling problems, no drug issues.
Police finally uncover the nature of Barry's voracious spending.
We learned that Barry had a problem playing the stock market, and he had lost a bunch of money. He would do it without Charlotte knowing it because it was totally against her wishes.
Investigators develop a theory of the murder that revolves around Charlotte's disputed inheritance.
Charlotte's cousin, Wayne Rice, he was contesting the will. So we thought she wanted it settled. And Barry did not want to settle. He was trying to talk her into holding out. Don't give Wayne Rice any money. And she was supposed to have a meeting with an attorney on the day that she was murdered.
Did an argument erupt over the inheritance, leading Barry to murder his wife?
I never would have expected Barry to be the suspect in Charlotte's death. Now, later, doubts began to cloud my mind.
Money had to be a factor in this murder case. I never felt like he went home to kill her that day. I think it was a fight, and I felt that if I could ever get him to talk to me again, I could get a confession from him.
Police ask Barry for another interview. He agrees.
I told him our goal was to continue to work on his wife's murder case, but we needed to talk to him some more. He asked me, can I call my wife? And the state investigator told him the only person you can call is your attorney. Well, that pissed him off. So he said, fine, let me talk to my attorney. So it ruined any chance we had to confession.
Once again, the investigation goes cold.
There was some angst in the community. We don't want an unsolved murder. We want closure to this case. And I don't think it was ever a case where the police didn't want to bring this to trial. I think it just took time to put a puzzle together.
Police are stunned when nearly 5 years after Charlotte's murder, a pair of unexpected witnesses come forward.
Barry's daughters, they went to the DA's office to their crime victims advocate.
After refusing to speak with police for years, Heather and Kara provide investigators with explosive new information.
And then finally, after so many years, they were ready to offer what they could to find justice for their mother.
The daughters of murder victim Charlotte Waits are finally ready to talk to police after years of silence.
That was a big turning point for us because prior to the time, the girls wouldn't talk to us because the investigation was pointing to their father.
As time went on, Heather and Kara began to have doubts about Barry's innocence.
When Heather and Kara came forward, they began to tell investigators about their dad stealing money from them.
The women provide a detailed account of how their father had left them penniless.
Because of Barry being a suspect in his wife's murder, the insurance company would never pay her death benefit. At some point, he was able to convince the insurance company to leave the money to the daughters.
At that point, Barry made his daughters an offer for Charlotte's inherited property.
He said, if you'll give me that insurance money, I will give you the land. So they give their dad the money. But when the land dispute settled, he signed over the property to his new wife and left his daughters out to dry.
As police dig deeper, they learn how Barry had manipulated his daughters into silence.
The youngest girl had been being told by her father, you're the main suspect in this case. You can't talk to the police because everybody in this town believes that you killed your mother.
Detectives also find out that Barry tried to throw police off his trail by providing false tips.
He's been submitting Kara's name, submitting the boyfriend's name, throwing red herrings at us. You're making us chase down rabbit holes.
Now they've learned what kind of person their dad is, and they said they finally realized that their dad killed their mother.
With the women offering to testify against their father, the district attorney reviews the evidence and decides to prosecute the case.
The day that we were able to have that warrant served, it was a good day.
Barry is charged with the first-degree murder of his wife of over 2 decades, Charlotte Waits. But the case is not a slam dunk.
You can convict on circumstantial evidence, but when you do that, you have to rule out every other plausible explanation.
The trial begins in November of 2006. Prosecutors begin by describing how and why Barry killed his wife. They assert that Barry left work around 11:30 a.m. to confront Charlotte at home about her disputed inheritance.
So Barry left the armory, went straight home to talk her out of making that settlement offer.
And Barry comes home, and they start arguing, and she says, "This is my family, and I'm going to do it, and this is my decision."
Then, Barry turned violent.
And at that point, he hits her. It caused her nose to bleed, and she wipes up with towels, and that was enough. She's just getting out of there and getting away from Barry.
But Barry doesn't let Charlotte escape.
He reaches and grabs her shirt and pulls her shirt back and starts choking her. And he pulls it so tight that he absolutely strangles the life out of Miss Waits. And then he takes her and just kicks her down the steps. He goes down and leans over the body to make sure that she's dead.
Prosecutors say Barry attempted to cover up his crime. He hastily hides the bloody towels and dumps Charlotte's purse.
And then he leaves and he starts putting his alibi together. He then goes back to the armory and he sends a fax, and that fax is supposed to be putting him out of the time frame of being at the house the time she's killed.
The prosecution shows that Barry had sufficient time to commit the murder.
There was an hour-and-a-half time frame from when Mr. Waits had left the armory and back to the armory when he sends a fax.
And prosecutors prove that every other suspect had an airtight alibi.
Every other name, every other person that was mentioned, we can eliminate them. But we could not eliminate Barry.
Later, an expert rules out the possibility of an unknown intruder based on further analysis of the unidentified prints at the scene.
The fingerprint expert says these are little kids' fingerprints. They don't have anything to do with this crime. But Barry Waits' fingerprints were down low, close to Charlotte Waits' body.
Finally, Barry's daughters take the stand.
You could read it on their faces and you could hear it in their voices. They were 100% convinced that their dad killed their mother.
After a brief deliberation, the jury reaches a verdict.
When the jury came back guilty, it wasn't relief. It was just a feeling of calm.
I went to her grave that afternoon and I said, "Okay, sweet girl, you can rest in peace, because we know that your killer is going to pay for what he did."
Barry Waits, the former mayor of Lynette, is sentenced to 40 years in prison.
I think at one time, Barry was a person that intended to take care of his family. But whatever demons he had that made him burn up his family's money, his mother's money, consumed him, overtook him, and the need for money was more important than his wife's life or his daughter's love.
This sweet family was totally devastated by that one senseless criminal act. I think Charlotte would want to be remembered as a person who loved life, loved her family, loved her profession. Every day of my life, I miss her.